Hi everyone. Hello everyone, welcome to Conf. Can everyone hear me? Is my mic on?
Speak louder.
AV guys, can I have my mic on? Testing, testing, testing. Okay. That doesn't work. Can you?
It does work.
It does.
You can put it on the screen.
Okay. Right, I think my mic's on now. Hi everyone. Quiet down. Is it not on? They tell me it's on.
Unless they got it really, really quiet. More mouse wheels.
I'm just going to have to... Oh, there we go. Hello. Hi, everyone. So welcome to Conf 3. And I'm Andrew Betts. I work for a company called the Financial Times. And Wi-Fi, obviously, very important. The Wi-Fi is not the greatest. So we have a fairly limited bandwidth. So if you could limit yourselves to, Twitter and email and on slide, that would be great. No downloads of massive files or anything. So Edge is a little bit different to other conferences. Who's been to an Edge before? Okay, so we have a fair few returners. That's great. We are an entirely debate-based conference, so there are no talks in the conventional sense. We start each panel session with a 10-minute opening talk from an expert in the subject. Then we have a 45-minute debate session where we try to bring up new information, like expose new use cases, challenge ourselves with, challenge the conventional wisdom that we currently have in the community. We have nominated delegates who have been given questions to ask, and if you were asked, you should have a piece of paper with a question on it. When the moderator calls on you, just read that question, and that will help us stay on topic and stay focused. We have up to 7 minutes of debate on each of those questions. We'll take interventions from anyone who wants to get involved, and then we move on to another topic. The reason we can those questions in advance is because we want your opinions, not your questions. So we want to hear what you think just as much as we want to hear what the panelists think. Everyone in here is a panelist, effectively. So be prepared to express that opinion. We have this tool called, I don't know what order I put my slides in. When you want to make a point, try to make sure that it's not an obvious point that you're making that is easily Googleable. 30 seconds is good, a minute is kind of pushing it, so we don't really like long speeches. And we know who you are already. When you start speaking, your name will come up on the screen automatically because we have a tool that will enable you to do that. And as I say, we much prefer your opinions to your questions. So this is the schedule today. We're going to start with a session on components, and the guys are already there to do that. And we have developer tooling, build process, later on, page load performance, pointers and interactions, accessibility, and future web. And this schedule is also on the website. And we also have a hub page, edgeconf.com/hub. So if you have a mobile device or a laptop, all the links that are important to you today are on this page. This page will also give you access to the feedback form. And we would like to get your feedback really as much as possible. So feel free to submit that form as many times as you like to provide us with as much information about the day from your opinion. Who do you have to blame for, thank for today? I brought all of the people together onto the panels. Martin Beebe, where are you? He's over there. So Martin Beebe has pulled off a Herculean feat of getting this venue and all of the logistics for today organized. My colleague Tim at FT Labs has been helping all of the delegates and panelists with their logistics. A couple of Googlers, Vivian and Pete, are helping us with video streaming because we are live streaming today on YouTube all day. Wesley Hales is the developer of OnSlide, which is our moderation tool, which you'll see in use in the first session, I hope. We had a bit of a panic this morning, and he was furiously coding for about 2 hours. So We're hopeful, but we're kind of 80% on session 1, pretty solid on session 2, I think. And my colleague Torben, who's been helping out a lot with the organisation for today. So organisations to thank as well, the FT, Microsoft for providing the venue today and all the catering, and the FT and Google for the entertainment you'll be hopefully experiencing this evening. We also have some fabulous prizes to be won at the end of the day. And we like to give these out to people who have got most involved in the debate. So we'll give one for the most inspired intervention. So if you say something particularly insightful or clever, then you might be up to win something. And the best social media update, because we want to be social and viral and that kind of thing. I'm told that's how you do social media. So we have a Nokia Lumia 1020, which is an excellent phone. That's courtesy of Microsoft, and a Lumia 820. So, transitions. Wow. And also, all the ticket revenue from today's event, minus some various running costs, are going to be donated to Code Club. And we'll give you some more information about that and exactly how much that is at the end of the day. If you're taking photos, please tag them, EdgeConf and EdgeConf London 2014. Tweet us a link to them, and we'll pull them together and send that out to everyone at the end of the day. So without further ado, let me pass you over to Dan Appelquist for the first session of the day, which will be about components.
Okay. Hi. Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. Is this thing on? Yeah? Okay, good. Hi there. We are the warm-up act for Jake Archibald. And we're going to be talking about components here, which is okay, by the way. That's fine. I'm good with that. So my name's Dan. I'm just going to briefly introduce people, and then we're going to have a talk, a brief talk, and then we're going to get into it. So my name's Dan Appelquist. I work for Telefonica, and I do Firefox stuff, Firefox OS, and I co-chair something called the TAG in W3C, which is kind of the technical architecture steering board for W3C. On our panel today, we have a panoply of stars here. We have Nicole Sullivan from Pivotal Labs, who is a proponent of component-based systems, and she's the creator of object-oriented CSS, Typomatic, and CSS-Lint. We have Alex Komorowski from Google, who's product manager on Blink and Polymer. We have Pete Hunt from Instagram/Facebook, member of the React core team. We have Soledad Panedes from Mozilla, who's working on things like Mortar, Brick, and Xtag. We have Peter Gaston, who is a creative technologist and an author and speaks about web components. And we're going to hear him speak right now. So without further ado, I'm going to ask him to come give a kind of intro talk. Tell us about components.
Thank you very much. Okay. Better log in first, excuse me. And my screen is locked. Embarrassing, but I can get over it, don't worry. I'm a professional. I've done this thousands of times before. Stood up here and embarrassed myself thousands of times before. Thanks. So good morning. I'm here to do a quick talk about introducing web components. I know some of you know them already, but I want to kind of give a little overview for everybody about basically the why, the how, and the when of web components. Don't use that hashtag. That's the, oh no, that is the right hashtag. I corrected it. Good one. Do use that hashtag. I corrected it. It's okay. My name is Peter Gaston. I tweet at Stops at Green. I'm write for brokenlinks.com. I'm a technologist and front-end lead, which is a very cumbersome job title for an agency here in London. So it's kind of my job to look at new and future web technologies and evaluate them and see when we can use them. And one of the things I'm most excited about at the moment is web components. So I'll be very much playing the role of the excited everyman developer in this panel of stars we've got here. Ever since we've been developing for the web, we've been copying other people's stuff. There's no shame in that. That's how the web kind of grew. That's how everybody got their knowledge. I learned by copying other people's stuff. I'm sure most of you did here as well. The view page source is one of the finest inventions of the web. Well done to the original early browser makers for kind of making that possible for us. But as we've done that, it's kind of become quite cumbersome to copy other people's stuff. It used to be, we'd nick a little line of code here and a line of code there, but then it just gets bigger and bigger and more involved to actually do that. But we still want to reuse other people's stuff, and we want to reuse our own stuff across our own websites as well. Some of the early efforts at kind of making this copying and sharing easy were Java applets. If anybody's developed for the web over 10 years ago, there's a very, very good chance you had a photograph of a house on a lake with a rippling lake underneath it. That would have been made with a Java applet. And then we had Dynamic Drive, which was the best place to go to if you wanted animated stars to follow your mouse around the window. But we started becoming kind of more professional with the way that we wrote our code afterwards to make it more shareable, to make it more reusable. We had fantastic efforts like Nicole's object-oriented CSS, which become like, very, very popular. Loads of people use it and has been even more formalized into things like BEM, languages like, or protocols like BEM. And in terms of other sharing, we've even had kind of whole UI elements, libraries grow up to enable us to start using, to stop having to code our own carousel 5,000 times and instead copy the carousels of other people. Efforts like jQuery UI and more recently Bootstrap have enabled us to do that. We write our code in a certain way and things just happen. And even bigger, much more powerful ways of doing this power some of the biggest sites on the web today. We're looking at things like React, which is written by Facebook and Instagram, who Pete here is going to talk about later today. And our fantastic hosts, the Financial Times, have their own version in Fruit Machine. These are kind of template constructors. You put in JavaScript and it outputs all the code for you. And you can power that through Node. And you can build whole, very, very powerful, scalable systems, but just based on this idea of copying and reusing other bits of code, other elements. So this is not an idea that web components is kind of a formalization of all these ideas. It's looked at all the things we've done in the past, and it's kind of said, well, people want to do this. Let's make a standard way of doing it. Let's make an easier way of doing it that hooks into kind of the low level of the APIs and of the browsers and makes this much, much easier to do. So where the goal is reusability, the answer is web components. There are three kind of core parts to web components. Sorry, beg your pardon. The first part's, let me gather my thoughts. There are three parts to web components. The first is what are known as custom elements. Custom elements, when I first read about web components, I thought they were kind of more of a background thing, and Shadow DOM was the big thing that everybody was really talking about. But in fact, as I see it, as I look at it, custom elements are web components. They're the core thing. Without anything else, custom elements are the bit we really, really want to use. The idea behind custom elements is that basically everything is an element. Everything we do and everything we have on the web is an element. That's kind of a core thing that drives the Polymer project, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, but custom elements themselves. For a long time, we've had elements like image, and if you provide a source to that image element, it puts an image in the page at that point. And we've had things like inputs. If you say input the type equals a range, it outputs for you a UI element in a consistent way across all the different browsers. So we want to do that. We like having those consistent UI elements, but why stop there? Why not have everything be an element? Everything we do all the time could be an element. So why not have, for example, a Google Maps element? You give it a latitude and a longitude, and it outputs a Google map into your page at that point. Why not extend existing elements? So we can say the video element, which we generally have in the page anyway, also accepts video camera input. We extend it with WebRTC. Why not have AJAX calls be elements? Why not put them in the page? We do that all the time. We want those results. We want to put those results in the page at this consistent place, so why not make this into an element as well? Creating a custom element is very, very simple. You create a new prototype object. You can add methods to it. You then register those elements into the DOM by giving it a unique name, which has to be hyphenated like this to make it compatible with current and future standardized HTML elements. And then you just tell it which prototype to use. And that's basically it. You registered the element with the DOM, you're giving it some methods, you're giving it some properties, and then you can just include it in your page. So you can do anything with that. That's exceptionally, exceptionally powerful. All of those things I just showed you before, Google Maps, the AJAX calls, the videos, they all start by basically doing this. But once you've written this, that's not, that's kind of nice that you've contained all this, you've attached all these properties to this element, but then you want to share that element. You want to make it shareable everywhere. So that's where the second part of web components comes in. These are called HTML imports, and they are simplicity itself. They're just like including a JavaScript file or referring to an external CSS file, but it's using snippets of HTML markup, hopefully with all your attached behaviors. So you put a new link element in the head, you say it's it's an import link, and you give it an href. And then that allows you to take your custom element and apply it to all of the pages on your site. But more than that, it also allows people to take that same code that you've written, that same import, that same snippet file, and apply it across all their sites too. So it's immensely reusable, which is really, really cool. The final core part of web components is the shadow DOM. Shadow DOM is a nice idea. It's not vital to web components, but it makes them really, really nice and useful. And it actually exists right now. Many of you might have seen this already. If you open up Chrome, and even I think it's even in Safari still, and you choose the Show Shadow DOM option, you can see the markup inside these UI elements that we use. For example, if you have an input type equals range, if you view the shadow DOM of that, you can see it's actually built of other elements. They're just not exposed to the user. They're hidden inside that. And that's what a shadow DOM is. It's the DOM inside the DOM that's hidden from the user in most senses, that kind of powers the element, the simplicity of the element. There are also a few things which aren't part of the web components spec, but are related to it and make it way, way more extensible and useful. One of them being the template element, which allows you to drop markup into your document and not have it passed or not have it rendered until you explicitly tell the browser to render it. We have mutation observers, which look for changes in the DOM and fire an event when they happen. And we have scoped styles, which allow you to apply CSS only to specific elements as opposed to being globally scoped as they are at the moment. So who's on board at the moment? Most of the work is being done in Chrome. If you look in Chrome Nightly or the dev channel, there's a lot of this stuff that maybe you have to enable it through flags, but it's all in there. Because of that, a lot of it comes into into Opera naturally as well, as they're based on the same Blink engine. Firefox are doing an awful lot of work in this as well. Custom elements are in there. I know they're working heavily on the Shadow DOM and the rest of the suite. Microsoft, we're not sure about at the moment, but I think the signs are good because they're involved in some of the extra stuff like mutation observers, and also they've got history in this. Internet Explorer 5 actually had this thing called HTML components, which is really similar to what web components do nowadays. So in this case, kind of Microsoft is sort of the proto-hipsters of the web components scene. Finally, there's Safari, and really, who knows? If you want to use them today, you've got two choices, or you've got two main choices. There's two libraries called Polymer and Xtags. One's kind of, they're both public, but one's kind of driven by Google and one kind of driven by Mozilla. Polymer has its Polymer core, which is where you do the registration. Xtags has its Xtag core. Polymer has a set of UI elements on top, and Xtags have Brick, which do the same job. And they both share this platform underneath. They both use the same platform to polyfill where these things are not present natively, which is really, really good and makes it the fact that whether you choose one or the other, you're still working into the same code base underneath, which is really helpful for kind of moving forward. The outcome that we get from this is meaningful markup. We get reusable elements, and hopefully in the future, who knows, even a consistent UI. Maybe the web could have a consistent UI like native apps have. That might be something that we want to move towards to make it easier for people so we can stop reinventing the wheel on every site we build. The challenges are, to put it politely, a proliferation of crap. If we let people create their own stuff, they're going to create some crappy stuff, but that's not a reason to move on. That's not a reason to stop using them. And performance, people have flagged performance, accessibility, and internationalization. And those are all the things we're going to talk about today. So web components are the future, for better or worse. Thank you.
Okay, well, given our, thank you, first of all, for that intro. I think that gives us a lot to think about, and I think it nicely intros us to our first questioner. I'm going to ask Yoav Weiss to stand up, hopefully, and to, yes, thank you, and to ask the first question of the day.
Hi. We're all aiming towards better page load times. HTML imports can include other imports. ES6 modules can include other modules. To what extent does using components breaks web performance by breaking parallelism.
So performance immediately. So let's first of all, I'd like to ask Pete to maybe as you're a company that has a strong emphasis on page performance and on performance, what's your view on that?
You want to just get the trolling out early?
Yeah, basically,
Okay.
yes.
Well, at Facebook, we found that flexibility is the most important thing, that there's not a silver bullet to initial page load performance. You can actually improve page load performance by deferring certain things. So, for example, we found that actually adding JavaScript to the page can improve page load performance if the JavaScript isn't driving an important part of the UI. At the same time that we found that the raw kind of, if you want to just say what is the fastest way to get a UI into the browser, it's server rendered HTML every time. So for us, we're not going to adopt a system that requires you to either server render or to client render. I think that the trendy term for this is called like isomorphic JavaScript. But every system that we have, we need to make sure that we can choose where on that spectrum do we want to server render or client render, and at which point do we want to push that data down the wire. Which is one of my big concerns about web components because it's blocked on the JavaScript execution and it's tied tightly to the DOM APIs.
So I want to go on that point. So HTML imports, the top level import from the main document does block rendering, just like a style sheet does. There is an async attribute that you can use to say do not block anything. And then within imports themselves, which are not blocking the main page from executing script or parsing and that kind of thing, you might have a complex interdependency of different things. We found it's much better in that case to, it's much easier to reason about if you don't have, if you do block those contexts as you're loading together resources. However, one thing to remember too is that Web Components provides a set of new tools. They don't take away any tools. So there's certain best practices that we've discovered that will remain. So for example, when you're doing development, sure, you might want a bunch of different HTML components in separate files, but when you deploy to production, you might want to compress those and minify those into one resource. We've also found that you can do a lot of interesting things like using these tools and using async and some judicious use of some of this stuff. You could, for example, define a very simple component that's just markup, that's actually in the head of your document, so that loads very, very quickly for the user, and then load the more complex component and use that after it loads.
Yeah, I'm actually, I think I like HTML imports. They seem pretty good. They seem like one of these tools that you can use to shoot yourself in the foot or not.
As with many tools on the web platform.
And yeah, I mean, like that's a sign that it's a good tool.
It can be a little bit dangerous to make sure it's
Do you
powerful
mean
enough.
that you would have multiple versions of the same component and load the simpler version first
So-
and then layer on a more
So
complicated version?
again, it's extra tools. And one thing that I think is interesting in this is with these extra tools, we found today on the web platform, we've got a set of tools in the web platform. Some of them are kind of janky and busted, but they're what we've got. We've added a few more tools on the end. What I found is that we found a lot of best practices today that we've all sort of discovered using this set of tools that we've got. And actually adding a few new ones brings questions, opens a possibility for different best practices that are actually even better. And one of the cool things about this is I feel like on the Polymer team and people who are using Polymer and X tags, we're kind of the pioneers. We're discovering this stuff and saying, oh my gosh, that's an interesting pattern that looked really crazy before, but actually now makes a lot of sense. So a number of folks have been experimenting with that kind of stuff. But we don't yet know what the best practices are for every case, obviously.
To come over to this side of the room, first of all, I wanted to ask Soledad, did you have a performance-related comment?
I have this thing, I mean, when you require kind of like a complicated UI, maybe it's not a matter of a page. You're going to be talking about an app. You're in a different space. So I don't think you can really consider the same case. I don't think it's equivalent. It's like, I mean, Instagram is a different case, I guess. It's like a hybrid between an app and showing content. But the case we're having with components is many times you're building a complex app, like with UIs and stuff, you really need to wait for the whole thing to wait, like to load, like before you can start, like, it has to block.
But I guess,
You can optimize and everything, but it has to block at some point. You need to wait. It's like any other
It's all
software.
about option value, though, right? Like we don't want to commit to a technology where you have to say these are my performance characteristics. And the way that that we're starting to think about initial page load performance now is that when you open your Mac laptop or you open an app on an iOS device, you see a static screenshot of the previous version of the UI before the real UI actually initializes. Now, wouldn't it be great if we could build all of our web apps like that? We could render it on the server, send down a static HTML page that can be cached, and reanimate it with JavaScript. So I'm just...
I hate that. I would kill the web. if
But you
that
have
happened.
the choice, though.
Okay.
Would you want that choice?
I guess the point is it's still up to the developers to figure out how best to use these tools for their particular uses.
So can I say, as like someone who's not involved in the high level of creation and kind of an end user of them, for us the choice often comes down to, is it better than what we've got now? So if we want to use something like jQuery UI or something like, or an existing UI library, do web components make that faster or better? I can't really tell that until we have them natively and they're implemented. I think, personally, I think they will be better, but I can't really test that until we're all finished and implemented.
I want to come back to the server-side rendering point you made. I know React has a mode where it sort of ships down the rendered components directly in the main body. We actually have found, this is an example where some people have explored going all web components. Teams at Google who are prototyping on this actually found they were people who are big proponents of server-side rendering. They actually found in some cases that it was actually faster to just heavily cache the components client side and then just ship down the sort of the component-based markup and have it inflate locally.
That's pretty similar to what we've found as well, but we found that the best thing is that you want some of your components rendered server-side, some of them rendered client-side, and choosing that mix.
And does that depend on mobile as well? Because I think the rendering is going to take a lot longer client-side on mobile.
Yeah, the performance characteristics of how much CPU you have on the machine, network speeds, latency, that kind of stuff will definitely, I think,
So I wanted to open things up to the audience here, and I'm looking over to Andrew. Is there? I mean, where? How? Okay. Just want to make sure. Yeah.
Another thing too is that we found, again, the Polymer team in particular is actually part of the larger Blink team. Mm-hmm. So Polymer the way I think of it is kind of almost a means to an end of making sure there's good feedback going into the specification process, because it's very hard to design complex specs in a room just through discussion. But it's also, we're identifying use cases that make a lot more sense in the web components world, and we'll literally yell over and be like, hey, Adam, this is something that we run into a lot. This is a very common pattern. And say, oh yeah, we can actually, if that pattern is going to be common, we can do optimizations in the engine. So imagine this new world, you'll see that different patterns become more common or things that are will be optimized.
It's sort of interesting though, because if you look at the UI libraries that are out there, Bootstrap or jQuery UI or object-oriented CSS, any of them, they're solving the same 50 problems over and over again. So while I really like web components and that you can do anything with them, I think maybe the browser should have solved those 50 things, like tabs and carousel and some basic stuff that's on like every site in the universe, so that we'd need 0 JavaScript for those things.
Well, that's actually a really good point.
So we actually should move on to the next topic.
Well,
maybe we can you can bookmark that, save it, and let's bring it to the rest of the discussion. So next, I'm going to ask Jonathan Fielding to ask his question.
So how do components help or hinder responsive design? Given that many queries are orthogonal to components, how do components play well with responsive design approaches?
Okay, so I'm going to hand that one over to Soledad first.
Okay, I've got mixed feelings about that. I think that you shouldn't be building components that are not too much about the look and feel of the app. That thing should be something from the outside, I think. Like, if you're like involving your component with aesthetics, maybe you're doing it wrong, I think. Like, it should be about functionality, at least in my view. And I think it's the view of everyone else. Like, I mean, even you have Shadow DOM and you have scope CSS and things, you can't really put too much look and feel inside that thing, because you want to be able to theme from outside and have breakpoints and everything. So if you put everything into a component, it's not going to be reusable, which is what you actually.
And again, I think actually there's cases where you don't want styling or you don't want to be too opinionated. There's other cases I think where developers would love. I think Bootstrap is a great example where it's a well-designed set of things that you can use that play together nicely. And I think there's a lot of room here for like opinionated UI components. But again, because people can choose to use them or they can choose to use different libraries, but it's a tool and there's going to be a spectrum of uses, I think.
Yeah, but you can't really put the whole set of breakpoints inside the component. It's just going to be a component that works only for this page, and it's not going to work for another set of designs. That's why I suggest, I mean, it could be nice, good enough. I mean, that's what we're doing in Brick. Make it look good enough so that it's not that ugly, but don't try to assume things that people are going to want. Make it decent.
Yeah, I think web components kind of put a much stronger onus onto the developer now than it has to, and what's been kind of from the browser makers in the past. People are going to start seeing how hard it is to create, for example, a select element and make it accessible and make it responsive and make it work across platform. And we don't have kind of these dedicated teams to do that. We have to work this stuff out for ourselves. We're going to see this a few more times in some of the other topics we talk about, I think, is how much more of a burden there becomes on us as developers. But it's also like a good responsibility, the fact that we are shaping these things in the way that we want to use them and we want them to be in the future.
So you say burden, I say it's empowering developers. So to your point earlier, Nicole, you were talking about why don't we just ship carousel, spec share carousel and ship it. Before, web developers weren't on the same playing field as browser vendors. So like we could implement some of these built-in controls using things like Shadow DOM that you guys couldn't use. And so one thing that we're excited about on the Polymer team in particular is this idea that people can play around. Like there's a XDAS GIF that someone was sharing yesterday. It's really cool. Like, I mean, I don't know if that should be standardized and shipped in browsers, but the cool thing is that people can use it and it feels just like a built-in element. And if everyone agrees that those are the semantics that we should use and everyone loves it, maybe that is a target for standardization. Because now we have developers are empowered to experiment and to play around and explore using the same tools that browser
But
vendors
how
have.
frequently has someone made a built-in element for picking something, and in fact, on my mobile phone, it doesn't work? Or in some other context that they haven't tested for, or they're really used to an Android browser,
Yep.
and so they made it exactly mimic that,
Yep.
and so then in whatever I'm using,
Yep.
it feels weird and has this uncanny valley, like it's sort of that thing, but it's not really quite that thing.
Yeah, I think that this is kind of what we were touching on earlier, and what I really wanted to jump in for is there's kind of like two things where native apps are kicking the web's ass. The first is performance, and like we can go into that forever. But the other thing is that the widgets that you implement on the web don't behave exactly like they do on native devices, or you don't have them, rather. So you have to basically polyfill them, and they don't behave exactly the same. So, while I kind of believe in the extensible web manifesto where we want these primitives to build whatever we want, it's also important to get kind of the integration with the system level components, so your UI table view actually feels like a UI table view on an iOS device, and the equivalent feels like the equivalent widget on Android. So I'm totally with you on that.
I'm going to go to the audience a little bit. We have Remy Sharp somewhere.
My question was for the previous discussions that might be thrown out.
All right. So let's go to Jake.
Yeah, so this is on with regards to the responsive design thing. Yeah, like having everything as components makes total sense, but don't we have a fundamental problem that we don't have a component model for responsive design? When we use media queries, they are to the viewport, not to the component.
So the question is about, whether be trying to restate it without restating it.
I read
yeah.
Tab Atkins wrote a very thoughtful article on this thing, because having responsive components that are just responsive to kind of in themselves and not to the viewport is a great idea, and it's been floated many times, but there are very, very hard technical problems to overcome before that. I can't actually remember exactly what he said.
So basically, anytime you're going to have rendering that where the child can influence the parent and the parent can influence the child, you can have loops in your rendering, and that can't work. Like that can't be a thing that can be implemented. And so, yeah, it comes up perennially that people want to be able to have like a media query on a particular element's width, but like we need to let that go. It cannot work.
Okay. So Tab has a very thoughtful post on this. I can't remember his conclusion. It's been a number of months from now, but. One thing that we found is in Polymer, where we really embrace that everything is an element, almost to an extreme, is that you build your app kind of, and you're like, oh, I'm always going to be the top level thing, and then next week you write another app that has like tabs with different applications inside of it kind of, and so it's important as a component author to think not just how am I using this, but what other context could I be used in, and some of the tools like media queries might make more sense for elements as well, but again, there are some challenges to deal with there.
Before we move on to the next topic, we have, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, but Narciso Jaramillo.
What's that? I just wanted to echo and amplify what Soledad and Nicole were saying. I think, so I used to work on Flex, which was, a component architecture for Flash, or whatever, but we tried to solve the same problem. What we found, especially in highly designed applications, is that it's really important to preserve the separation between the functionality and the appearance, right? The components should be about the behavior of the component, and people should be able to customize the appearance so that it fits with whatever they want. And I think the more people put things like, specific and shadowed on, the less the component is really going to be usable for people on different content sites and across different devices. So is there anything architecturally in web components that makes it easier for a component author to just worry about the behavior and then, not make too many assumptions about what the presentation is going to be?
Thoughts, quick thoughts?
You can, and it's up to the component author to do what they want. I think there's going to be a spectrum of opinionated UI components that are themable and ones that have no opinion on UI. But I think
There's scope style, which helps with this.
Yeah.
But also, I think that that only gets you to a certain point, right? Like at some point, the appearance of your element has to be coupled with changes in behavior as well. So I think really focusing on the composition of elements and how, if I've got a component, like, do I want that full drop-down functionality? Like, what if I want to add separators inside the drop-down element and that developer didn't think of it? So we need to think it really in terms of composition, not only of styling, but also of behavior and the way that data flows between components as well.
So before we move on to the next thing, I just want to, Jonathan, you're on the queue. Quick comment?
If you've got some functionality you want on the mobile and some functionality you want on your mobile, functionality for desktop, it's a responsive site, would you show and hide different components? Or
it's going to be up to the developers in different cases. We've played around with on the Polymer side. Most of the UI elements we have now are just explorations.
Well, and just like building the UI libraries of that have come up until now, I think there are UI libraries that are very opinionated, like this thing is going to be exactly this width, and it means you can only use it when magically that's the width you need. And the better UI libraries and the ones that have sort of emerged are the ones that build tabs that fill in whatever space is available. And that's still going to be true in a web component
There was
world.
also an earlier part, as part of the earlier web component suite, there was an idea of these things called decorators, which are HTML markup applied with CSS. So you could apply different markup and use your media queries in that way. But again, there were like insurmountable technical problems in doing that, and that's had to be dropped. So I don't think this is something that's going to be easily achieved.
So I'm going to have to cut it off there because we need to move on to the next thing, which is Joshua Peak. Can you please speak your mind? Yeah, can we get him a mic?
Hi, I've done a lot of work on GitHub's implementation of content security policy. I'm wondering how web components fit into CSP. Polymer and other polyfills make use of eval and HTML imports to declare the scripts in line. In general, how will web components become another attack vector, and what's the general story for security in web components?
So again, we're adding some new tools. We aren't taking others away. It is possible to use web components within a very restrictive CSP environment. For example, Chrome apps has a very restricted CSP environment, and although by default in Polymer we recommend people define their script right in line with the templates, there's a version of our vulcanized tool that will allow you to actually have those as external scripts that will obey the CSP policy and not be eval in the main comics of the page.
Other thoughts on security in general as well? Like it really occurred to me when I was reading this question about I think I added the thing about can web components be a vector for attack in some way, and I guess thoughts on that from any of the panel. Have you thought about that?
I think we should be fine. I mean, you still have the same content origin restrictions. It's still JavaScript. It's not different JavaScript. It's still a thing that is running the same way that all the other JavaScript is running.
Right.
So you should still get your browser angry if you do something inappropriate. So I think we should be fine. Haven't tried to break it yet.
And there are a number of attack vectors. If you use third-party content, for example, if you don't use CSP and cores effectively, there's attack vectors on the web today. This doesn't change any of that. If you're using someone else's hosting of the components, like sure. To be clear, by the way, Shadow DOM does not provide a security boundary. That's a misconception that sometimes we see from people. We have iframes for the security boundary, but Shadow DOM just provides a much stronger style encapsulation, but ultimately it's a boundary that can be crossed in the page.
Any other thoughts on security or CSP?
That's really not my area at all.
No? Okay, maybe we move on then. Actually, so now I'm gonna ask Stuart Cox. Can we get Stuart on mic?
Yeah, so do you think web components open the door for developers to abandon semantics? Are we going to end up with a million different homegrown select widgets? And what is the meaning of a tag name if that happens?
So I'm going to ask Nicole to field that one.
So I'm probably going to give a little bit of an unpopular point of view here. I like semantics on a gut level, but when I'm making a decision about what to do for a project, I try to keep in mind what I'm actually trying to get out of it and what semantics actually give me. Because in a lot of cases, we give way too much weight to semantics when we aren't getting enough out of it for basically the value that we're trying for. So basically, I think that there's semantic value in accessibility, and we get that from ARIA roles. And now our roles, what I think is great about ARIA roles is that they're divorced from whatever markup you happen to have used. And so we're no longer relying on some implicit connection, but instead we're basically getting the semantic value from something we can tag onto anything. So I think that that's important. And then the other value that we get is sort of developer maintenance and how developers will understand our code later. Because those are basically the only two things that use semantics. And I think that actually being able to write custom tags has a chance to make it, and being able to hide a bunch of junky markup gives us a fairly good, not junky, but presentational markup basically, gives us a chance to be able to have cleaner HTML that contains just the things that are relevant to understanding what's going on the page.
You say abandon semantics. I mean, we've abandoned semantics. If you open up the DevTools Inspector on any page, you see a whole bunch of stuff that's meaningless. The cool thing about Shadowdom is you can take that presentational gunk that's required and sort of store it off to the side. And so if you look at pages that are written in a web componency style, you look at it and you can understand it. Like, it actually makes sense reading it. And I also think that we abandoned semantics because the components that we're shipping in the browser, things like input and select, they're great, but there weren't that many of them, as you were saying. I mean, there's no carousel built into the browser. And so this allows us to create that carousel.
Maybe for the carousel there shouldn't be, just because
Right,
it's
right,
an awful UI pattern.
But I'm saying this allows us to create those things and actually represent them more semantically in ways in the documents.
Yeah, the weird thing about
I got Remy on the queue. I just wanted to pull him out.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah? Can we get Remy a mic? Up here?
So, we're rushing to make all these libraries, Brick, Polymer, and so on. We're rushing to create web components, and this kind of hangs a little bit off of the blocking thing, but we're making old mistakes. We're repeating old mistakes. Like local storage is a good example of new technology that came out a few years ago. There was big kind of throw of arms, and it's not asynchronous, and we're warned against using it. But we're repeating the same mistakes when we have the opportunity with new technology to not make these mistakes and make sure that everything is good for going forward, since it's effectively a clean slate, right? So.
But there's no such thing, is there? Like, we are always going to make mistakes. Like, we're going to totally screw up.
No, I agree. Unknown mistakes that we're going to create in the first place, but knowingly develop against mistakes.
Well, I think that a lot of those mistakes come from this, we're not sure if the browser is an SDK or a runtime, right? So like it wouldn't make any sense for you to have your OpenGL calls be semantic, right? But OpenGL is a very performant API. So why do the data structures that we render to the rendering engine we have available to us, which is the DOM, why do those have to be semantic? Why do we even think about that? Why do we think about like, we talk about, we need to make this performant and expressive, and like sometimes those are at odds with each other. So I think that the reason why you get things like synchronous local storage is because the fast API, the fast primitive, is an asynchronous call, right? But the easy API is a blocking call. And so we needed to basically make a decision like, are we going to make the browser an SDK? Are we going to make it like Visual Basic, or are we going to make it like libc, right? And it's still this kind of Frankenstein environment.
The thing is, the web community prefer the easier solution. We'll always take the shortest route to actually getting the thing live. So if it means we like kill the performance in the browser, we'll take that route as a community, because we're great at copying and paste. We're great at just ripping off other people's code. So if you have the opportunity to, like the baseline doesn't have those kind of blocks built into it or mistakes built into it, then that seems like the right.
So Remy, this is a very complex topic, and I'm not going to pretend to know all the details. I've watched this be argued many, many times by people much smarter than me in this issue, and it inevitably after hours of discussion, everyone goes, oh, I get it now. But it's one of those things that's very hard to explain. I can't do it effectively.
Maybe we have some of those smart people in the room. So so first of all, Florin Egger. Can we get him a mic?
I wonder if we are not. I wonder if we're not hiding a lot of stuff in abstractions when we're using web components. Doesn't it affect maintainability and actually hurt reuse, because we're building again the 100 different select boxes because we all have just a little bit different use cases?
I think using web components, it's very clear. It makes your code much more maintainable because you can think more in your local context. You don't have to worry about what someone else elsewhere in the page has done, what kind of styles they put in the global style sheet. Because you have scope styles, because you have this nice encapsulation mechanism, you can think much more locally. And it's really freeing as a developer to be able to think like that. Because today, if you have more than 3 people working on a site together, they have to coordinate. They have to say, well, don't do this thing, and please make sure your selectors don't accidentally select over into my area. And actually, my personal experience on a lot of people who have used web components so far has been it's actually far, far, far more maintainable. I don't know if anyone else.
Yeah,
It's like, as I mentioned before, it's like, is it better than what we have now? What we do now is we just get a load of divs with classes attached to them and attached to things to that, and it's all put directly into the markup of the page. It's all in the DOM tree. Now, I think that what web components bring through encapsulation, through scope styles, I think that makes that better and more maintainable. It's not going to stop people from writing, as I said, a proliferation of crap. That's never going to end. That's what we do until we find, maybe we settle.
That's the web. Proliferation of crap.
Until maybe we settle on, something like Brick or Polymer, or the two of them together come up with something that we're all so enamored with, and we decide to let's be mature about this and stop reinventing everything.
When
all
have
the
we
time.
ever settled on anything?
Right.
But one thing that I think is very important about this is that web components, to the extent they pretend that they're just other elements, to the extent that they're taking configuration through attributes or methods and properties on the prototype, and that they emit events when interesting things happen, it doesn't matter how they're implemented on the inside. So you can use an Xtag component right next to a Polymer component or within one another, and it just works.
So I agree with the spirit of abstraction and encapsulation, but web components deals primarily with scope style. And honestly, Nicole solved that a couple of years ago, and with object-oriented CSS. So I think that that's solving.
Except that in order to make object-oriented CSS work, you have to have a lot of developer rigor, and everybody has to be on the same page about making sure. And
Right.
it isn't even on the same page. When someone's just learning CSS, they're going to make 1,000 mistakes before they're ready to write something that's really encapsulated. And then there are other problems where you can't encapsulate it, right?
Yeah.
Everything, styles are going to flow through to children.
Yeah, I'm speaking from like a very Facebook-specific perspective where we can control our engineering organization.
Yeah.
But the problem is that like that's the easy part.
You do that.
But and also, that's hard for just even a large
Rumors
organization
are
where everyone's
true.
being paid by the same person. We run into this at Google all the time.
Well, we have a
Okay,
rule of like
let's-
single
let's-
class name for.
Before we move on to
can I
the
say
yes,
something
go
quickly?
ahead, yes.
I have experience of building things with components, reusable things, and they work great. If you want, I can show you. Like, if you don't trust all these guys there.
Okay, so wait
Like,
for the
yeah.
break. One more comment maybe from the audience before we, Guy from Akamai. Can we get just a brief.
I mostly wanted to kind of highlight some of the comment that Remy was getting to. So I mean, when you look at the existing successes we have, like Node is one of its claims to fame is that it forces you to be asynchronous, right? A lot of the problems that we have on the flip side of that, if you look at the async widgets that anything that didn't ship as async widget before for Google Analytics, Facebook, for Twitter, we're stuck with those things now. So I do think that there's strong merit in taking away some of the flexibility in favor of performance or in favor of helping it, making it a little bit harder to shoot yourself in the foot.
So to be clear, HTML imports don't block script and parsing of the main document. They don't. They do block rendering just like style sheets do today. But again, if you want to render something fast, you can put things directly in your document. You don't have to use HTML imports for everything. Right.
The recurring theme within Facebook engineering is one word, and it's predictability. It's like you want to know what's going to happen when you do something. With Node, you know everything is going to be async out of the box unless you're using a weird like C extension, right? With the DOM, like, yes, there is a fast path, but it's so easy to fall off the fast path. Like, you don't know what's going to happen. You have no idea to predict, or no way to predict what's going to happen because you have to reason about the entire system as a whole, which I think is an argument for building abstractions on top of, fast underlying primitives like you talked about. And I think that's the way forward. I don't think baking more functionality into this unpredictable DOM is the way forward.
We're going to move on. I'm sorry, Christian, but you'll have a chance to talk later. The next topic is going to be introduced by Kormel Lesinski.
Hi. What's the story of internationalization of components? Does the user of the component can inject strings in the component, or does the component have to have hooks for internationalization?
Again, this is an area where the best practices, people are still being pioneers in this space to see what these new tools do. In different cases, it will depend, I think. But we were experimenting with a number of approaches on Polymer. I think that it will depend for different code bases, potentially.
I can't speak to the spec, but we've been building component architectures at Facebook for a long time, and it's made internationalization a lot easier. Because your components, you basically say, hey, this is my internationalized text label component, and you drop that in wherever you need internationalized text. Or, and within that you can have tokens like, oh, this is my user's gender component, and it'll know, it'll look at the user object and it'll say, oh, is this male or female, and put the right string in there. And so when you build with a component architecture, the composition possibilities make internationalization a lot easier. Yep. And we built tooling around that for our own systems, including React and XHP, that kind of people don't even really think about it so much. They just wrap their strings in the right tags.
This will be one where I think, sorry to bang on the same drum again, but it puts more of the emphasis on you doing the right thing. Like if you make UI elements, and I think in most of the, if I'm not mistaken, all of the UI elements we have at the moment don't include any text by default. So you just drop your own values into there. But if you create a UI element that does have text in there by default, the onus is on you to put something in there to make that internationalized. Or, make your work open source and let other people do that for you.
So one meta point I want to make is that because web components get this interoperability for very cheaply, like I think Xtags and Brick interoperating with Polymer is a great proof point for that. It means that today, it's different than what happens today. So today, as a developer, you pick a framework, right? At the beginning, you say, okay, well, this framework has 20 widgets that look pretty good, I guess. But then you get to them, and there's, maybe their calendar widget isn't accessible or isn't internationalizable. And because the competition is on the framework level, you don't necessarily get the framework at the component level. Whereas with web components, it's
sure, but how much, thinking of the frameworks that we have today, the amount of stuff you have to pull in order to make any one, you could pick and choose and take, one piece from one framework and one bit from another, but the amount you have to pull in order to do that, my worry is that each component is going to depend on a whole bunch of dependencies, and they're going to end up actually pulling in way too much.
Part of the reason that's the case today is because we have to create our own parallel universes and use the DOM just as sort of the rendering layer, and that's it. Actually, one of the cool things about Polymer is most of the code size is that layer of polyfills, which is completely unnecessary if the browser you're using ships Shadow DOM, custom elements, HTML imports, etc. So it goes way, way, way down in size as browsers ship those natively. So
back to the topic.
Yeah.
I think custom elements are just DOM elements, so you can just use your current libraries for internationalization.
Say I18N.
Yeah. Or L10N. Yes, I've been running some tests, and it works great with mobile and everything. You just add your custom data attributes to translate things, and it translates things. It's just another element, so it's just that once you create it, but it works like any other thing works. Yeah.
Any other comments, Nicole? Did you want to know? Okay. Okay, so I think given that, we'll move on to our next possibly related topic, which is going to be asked by George Thomas.
Hi. How can web components be used to enhance accessibility? Can shared standards for interaction be developed and agreed upon for common components?
So accessibility is incredibly important. Actually, Alice Boxhall, who's going to be speaking on one of the later panels, is on the Chrome accessibility team, has been working very closely with some folks on the Polymer team and the web component standards folks.
And we shouldn't rat hole too much into general accessibility issues because we're going to have a whole panel on that later. So I was almost reluctant to field this question in the panel, but what are the web component specific issues that have cropped up around accessibility?
So our understanding or belief, and Alice can correct me if I'm wrong here, is that actually we think that it should be possible to make things just as accessible as before. But in addition, because there can be competition on the level of components, there'll be much more pressure on component authors to create accessible, internationalizable components. And so actually, accessibility is one of those hard things for developers to wrap their heads around sometimes. It's one of those things they put off till the end. But if you use a component that's already made accessible, that's actually great for users because it's more likely that you don't have to do all that thinking yourself every single time you use it. So I'm actually I'm hopeful that the accessibility story will get better in the components world.
It's hard to see it getting better than native UI controls, though.
And so the best practices of using native UI controls where necessary or where relevant makes sense in ARIA as a fallback if you don't, for some reason.
So I'm like the world's biggest DOM hater here, and I'm excited about Shadow DOM because being able to style a select component is like the prime example of how awesome Shadow DOM is, I think. Because like we have our custom select element component at Facebook that matches our interface guidelines, and it's like a zillion lines of code, and then a zillion extra lines of code on top of that to get like the tab behavior right for accessibility. Now, the browser and the operating system have already done all that work for each platform, so we can leverage that with Shadow DOM. So I'm really excited about that. Additionally, the way that we use a component architecture at Facebook, we don't use the web component standard, but we use the same kind of ideas of encapsulated UI elements rather than templates or traditional MVC, is we have a library that has been developed that is already accessible and ready to go. And you just, people who don't know much about accessibility just go in, pull a component off the shelf, drop it in.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking a lot about kind of creating your own totally bespoke custom elements, but we shouldn't forget that that's a big part of it as well, is extending existing elements becomes very, very easy through web components as well. You can take your select box, which we seem to be using as the default go-to for whenever we talk about it, and just add your own things to it. But the underlying, the markup inside the Shadow DOM still remains as accessible as it was before. When we are creating our own elements, again, we have to bake accessibility into it. But you can put ARIA roles onto these things. You can do all that. If you view the Shadow DOM of any element that exists out there, you'll see that they've got ARIA roles in there already. We should be using that as a model of best practice. But it is a concern because people...
I know there's a lot of accessibility thrown around here by not experts. I'm very scared of what's going on here right now.
Okay.
We have a whole session on that later.
And we're going to talk about ARIA later, actually, I think, yeah. I do notice that we have 0 people connected to the system. So, okay, that's what I thought. So if there's somebody who wants to ask a question related to this, okay. Yes, Jeremy.
So yes, this is related to accessibility and semantics as well, as you pointed out, Nicole. It's one of the reasons for semantics to exist is exposing hooks, for example, to assistive technology. But to say then, we're all sorted because we've got ARIA, so no problem. First of all, ARIA is intended as a stopgap solution, working towards native semantics. That's the end goal. ARIA is to get us there. And also, if the whole point of web components is that we can invent these new browser elements effectively, but then in order to make them accessible, we are restricted to what ARIA can do, then we're just passing the buck to ARIA. And unless there is a concept of ARIA components, then web components will always be using a small pool of accessibility hooks, which limits their scope, which kind of goes against the whole point of web components.
I agree with Christian that we aren't necessarily, I'm not an expert on accessibility. I guess maybe this is best deferred to the accessibility panel.
Well, you just need to make the primitives you have for composition as expressive as possible, right? Like the only way to solve this problem is to be able to compose more complex things out of simpler things that are accessible and somehow make the system as a whole accessible, right? So web components need to be, or whatever component architecture you use, need to be as expressive as possible. And it's not just ARIA attributes, and it's not just styling, it's behavior. And I think you have to be able to compose with the full power of a real programming language to do that. And you need to be able to override specific bits of functionality. So part of it is kind of the architecture of the system you're using, and part of it is the power of the primitives that you have, which is why I think composing with DOM elements isn't powerful enough. I think you got to compose with Turing-complete programming languages to do this.
I think you're also bringing up something important, which is that the whole web community is suffering with the fact that the accessibility side of web standards and the web and and other side of web standards don't talk to each other nearly enough and haven't figured out how it's supposed to work together very neatly. And so I think a lot of this we don't actually have answers for. It isn't. I mean, yes, we're not accessibility experts, but also we don't know how it's supposed to work together. And the standards teams themselves aren't really working together.
Other gentleman in the front row, can you introduce yourself as well?
Hey, Matt Bond. The question was kind of phrased of like you have accessibility on the web today. How does that apply to Polymer components? Is there anything Polymer and just web components in general can do that would be basically make accessibility better? In other words, ignore what today is. If you could change it and make web components accessible, ignoring everything now, what would you do? Like for me, you could add lifecycle events saying, you're going to get focus, deal with it. Like that should be part of the web component. That they have to deal with that at that point.
Yeah, I'm not an accessibility expert, so I guess it's...
I mean, this is kind of what the Shadow DOM's trying to solve, right? Like select boxes seem to be pretty accessible. At least they do the same semantics that the operating system does. One of the things, Nicole mentioned this before, is the more native UI you expose in the browser, the more you can reuse from the experts that have actually implemented it right.
Remy, I see your hand up, but we are going to move on, and we are going to pick up this topic hopefully in Christian's accessibility panel as well. So I hope that we revisit this as well. Our last question of this topic, some guy named Andrew Betts possibly needs to ask this. It's a longie.
Until web components are more widely supported, in what use cases would you consider polyfills like Polymer or X tags? Actually, I've got one already. In what use cases would you consider polyfills like Polymer or X tags over alternative component frameworks? To what extent do the existence of polyfills hinder or slow down the implementation of web components?
So I think
I couldn't hear that.
Polyfills. So the question is really related to polyfills, and I think the crux of it is, are the existence of polyfills going to hinder or help the adoption or the implementation of web components, within browsers, within in general in the developer community? Any thoughts on that?
I think it will help. It will help the adoption in other browser vendors because it allows developers to use the technologies today in a way that actually works quite well. It's just when the native implementation is there, it's much faster. So like Shadow DOM, for example, is a very complicated thing to polyfill, and it's not possible to do it 100% perfectly. CSS in particular is very hard to polyfill correctly there. And then when it's supported natively, it's just much, much faster. It doesn't have to be done in the script.
I see somebody who might know something about polyfills asking a question.
It's not specifically polyfills, but when we get to the day when we're including Polymer and we're including this other web component that comes from another website and another web component from another website, and all the magic is kind of tucked away between my X GIF tag. Those web components are going to be carrying all their own JavaScript, for instance. And what if they all pull in their own jQuery library or polyfills library for all that, they want to polyfill.
Different versions of jQuery.
Yeah, different versions of jQuery. The version's not a problem because they're going to be sandboxed off, right, I assume.
Sure, but that's a lot of
the overhead for having 4 or 5 web components where they're all pulling in a JavaScript library that is jQuery but from different locations, how do we deal with that? How do we not end up returning to the days of dynamic drive where we're just slapping in big blobs of code and going, fuck it, it works?
Yeah. So one of the cool things about HTML imports too is they can do deduping of those resources. So if different components can rely on the same thing and it won't be re-downloaded twice. And of course, if you use some kind of minification step before you push to production, you can make sure that you take care of that. But of course, if you have different versions of jQuery, you're going to want to avoid that as a developer, just like you do today. You don't want to use.
What I'm talking about is, it's like I'm using Brick and Polymer together because you've got different web components. So I want to use both of them.
Mm-hmm.
How does that even get surfaced to me?
What's the X tags perspective on this?
I think it's pretty much the same. I mean, you have to be responsible. You have to be minifying. Just choosing the components you want. It's just like if you just load the whole jQuery UI, it's like huge. And it's the same with Brick. If you download the whole thing, it's not that huge, but it's still a lot of things you might not want. But you can choose, build your own distribution.
Yeah. And
With,
so-
I mean, you've got scripts for packing things like as they do. I think we call it smush. I don't know why.
Isn't this like a fundamental problem with software though? Like,
It's a big
if
process.
if you coded in the 90s, you know, like DLL hell and that kind of thing. So I think that the pipe dream of like pulling components off the shelf and dropping them in is way more nuanced than people normally say it is. Like, for us, we just run it through a build system and we dedupe and alert when there's different versions.
But you're using your own web components, so you're not using anyone else's web
Well,
components?
we have a component-based architecture that like we own the whole stack. So.
Yeah, so that,
And
it's
they
fine
also
when you
have a
own the whole
back
stack.
end that is component based and matches up exactly with the front end part of it, so that changes it.
So
That's
also,
powerful.
practically today, Polymer and Xtags use the same layer of polyfills below. Remember, that's a layer that's where the bulk of the code is in Polymer in particular. And remember, that goes to 0 over time is the idea.
I don't
And-
see how that's true though. Like, yeah, that's true in a really simple component, but as the components want to do all these widgety things, it's going to have the same amount of code that any library that would have done the same thing
Not
has
necessarily, because to the extent that today a number of frameworks have no other choice but to retreat to script and to create their own world that uses, again, DOM as just a sort of dumb rendering surface. In a world where you're working more closely with DOM, you don't have that overhead where you have to create your own world and create your own concepts, this parallel hierarchy script.
In a world. All right, so I'm being told from the front row that we need to wrap up. I think my personal maybe closing statement might be web components, some assembly required, right? But what is it? Vague but interesting, maybe. Okay, so we'll leave it at that. Thanks very much, and thanks to our panelists.
Okay, everyone, thanks for bearing with us. We just got a couple more people to get mic'd up, and then we'll be ready for the next session. You all right?
How long for each question? Is it 7 minutes?
Yeah. So our next session today is developer tools. Am I live? Can anyone hear me? Yes. Hello. Our next session is on developer tooling, something close to all of our hearts, I'm sure, and moderated by a veteran of Edge. I think, have you done both of them, Jake?
Yeah, well, 3 now.
3, yes. Yeah. Well, hopefully. You haven't done it yet.
if I drop dead between now and the end, we'll count it as 2.5.
Yeah,
right?
that's fair. Okay, so Jake Archibald.
Yes, yeah, welcome to the second session. Developer tool, no longer a phrase that was used to bully me in the schoolyard. It's a key part of web development. It's difficult to imagine how we survived through a period where, you know, all we could do is play a game of higher or lower with alerts. I mean, that's how I first started debugging. And browser error messages were, you know, at best indistinguishable from stoner philosophy. You know, things like undefined is not defined. Yeah, thank you, Bryson. Too many arguments. Just everyone chill out. But what of the future? You know, where can we take this? Well, I'm joined by this panel of developers developing developer tools with developer tools for developers. They are Kenneth Auschenberg started Remote Debug, an effort to unify remote debugging tools. Henry Bergius, I'm going to pronounce your name wrong already, sorry, founder of NoFlow, the Kickstarter-based visual flow-based web development environment. We've got NJ, the instigator of Brackets, Adobe's code editor built off the back of web technologies. Representing the browsers, we've got Joe Walker, who's working on Mozilla's new and shiny developer tools. We've got Pavel Feldman, who's working on the Chrome developer tools. And to start us off with some words about things, a man who needs no introduction. Okay. Big up to my Chrome boy, it's Paul Irish.
Thank you. All right. Rad, thank you. So I want to give you a brief overview of kind of where we're at in web developer tooling. If we can get my slides up, we'll be good. There's been a lot of iteration and movement lately, but I wanted to first kind of bring us back into kind of the history of, just a moment. It's not me. It's that computer.
Andrew?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's right. It's right.
There you go.
Love it. All right, thank you guys. I'm going to give you a quick overview of where we're at with web developer tooling. But to do that, I want to head back and talk kind of the history. Back in 2006, Hixie, the editor of the HTML5 spec, he was kind of testing out how HTML is parsed, and he wrote a tool. And this tool came out to be first. He was like diagramming how DOM is constructed based off of HTML. And he's like, you know, I can create this live DOM viewer. And so here is the DOM view of what we've constructed with, you know, in this case, just a quick p tag, right? That's our DOM. And then it just so happened that only 3 months later, this guy basically debuted. Just 3 months later, Joe Hewitt released these initial screenshots of Firebug, kind of leading us to this, the angle brackets representation of the DOM that we know and love and see every day. Now, I do want to shout out to the more OG, the OG developer tool. This is Venkman, the JavaScript debugger inside of Firefox. This debuted around 2001. So it was really kind of the first thing. But since then, there's been a lot of movement. So fast forwarding now, I want to show you where some of the developer tools are these days. So first, over on Firefox, there's been some fantastic things happening. I'm going to show a quick preview of what things look like with the WebGL shader editor. So what we have here is a WebGL scene, and we are live editing a GLSL shader. Kind of changing some of the dimensions of this. One of the really nice aspects I like about this editing environment is as we live edit it and make some mistakes, we actually get feedback on validation errors that we are triggering in the GLSL. Now moving outside of that, there's been a lot of fantastic work. This is a screenshot of some new upcoming work from the memory tooling inside of Firefox Developer Tools, heap snapshotting and showing what's going on inside of the memory. You might have seen this. This is a nice visualization of what's happening with CSS transforms. Really fantastic to understand how exactly the original shape is being modified through transforms. Also, this is fantastic work. We're just stopped here at a breakpoint, but we understand the various scopes that are active and see, for instance, how a certain variable may have been available in a previous scope but has now been overridden, so it gets striked out. And then this was a fantastic experiment that I don't think has landed yet, but I like where it's going. It's audio breakpoints. So basically, kind of like hearing when different points in your code get hit. I really like this approach. All right, so over on Chrome DevTools, there's been some fun stuff happening. You might have seen screencasting. So this is an effort to say, hey, we can actually take what's on the screen of your device and show it inside of your desktop browser. Not only can we show it, but also have it interactable. So because typing on a phone is pretty slow, we can just type on your keyboard, click around, and all those clicks will be translated into touches onto the device. Then a few more good stuff. This is a flame chart visualization of the JavaScript profiler, giving you good insight as far as how, across time, your JavaScript is executing, understanding what is sort of the pattern and rhythm of function execution inside the browser. This is device emulation, so emulating not only screen resolution, but device pixel ratio, the viewport configuration, touch events, and doing that all right inside of desktop so that we don't actually have to even go over to the device. And this is a new upcoming feature, asynchronous call stacks. So we can actually see from where we are, how we got there across an XHR and across a set timeout, so we can trace all the way back in that full line. The IE team has been trucking ever since the new release of their F12 dev tools. They've done some fantastic work. This is a quick screenshot of where the new network tool is. Really good looking waterfall and a lot of detail in there too. Also new to the F12 tools is proper memory heap snapshotting and memory profiling. So here we can take two snapshots, we can compare them, see what's going on. And one of my personal favorites is their new UI responsiveness panel, which gives a lot of insight as far as the operations that are happening inside the browser, how that relates to frame rate, so we can help identify how exactly we can improve the performance of the page and reduce the jank. So Kenneth here from the Remote Debug project showed this fantastic demo over full frontal. Remote Debug is a fantastic way to basically bridge the gap between different browsers, their runtimes, and their browser developer tools. So we actually have Chrome's developer tools interacting with the Firefox browser. Not only can we inspect elements, but also change the DOM of Firefox using the Chrome developer tools. And there's a lot more where that came from. NJ from Brackets, I wanted to show this quick and fantastic demo. Brackets has long been doing kind of live CSS development where you can just change things on the fly, but this is the live HTML development. So as you know, there isn't a one-to-one mapping. Mapping HTML to DOM is not a trivial thing, but here we are moving around our HTML, our DOM is updating, and we do a quick view into the CSS that applies for this H2 and make those changes on the fly, make it hot pink, because that's the right way to go.
I didn't make this demo.
All right. Another fantastic thing inside of Brackets is the Theseus JavaScript debugger. Really powerful work. So here we actually see a log across our code of how it actually executed. We had 4 calls that entered into the fetch. And we can also see, of those 4 calls that entered in the fetch, 2 of them went into the error handler. And then we can actually see, oh, we went into the error handler. What was in the error object? We can retroactively look inside of that error object and inspect that situation. Henry from NoFlow is here, and I want to quickly show what NoFlow looks like. It's a new kind of flow-based
visual paradigm for writing JavaScript applications. Let's see if we can get that video back up. Barely. Well, but it kind of turns the idea that of looking at code on its head and introduces a much more kind of revolutionary idea for building together rich experiences. All right, so beyond kind of what's represented here on the stage, there's a few other things that are happening inside the ecosystem of browser developer tooling I want to quickly show. The Trace2GL project came out a little while ago, but said, we're just going to log absolutely all the operations that are happening. In this case, we are logging not all this, but we inspect retroactively what happened here, and we can actually see these if statements. They're in red down at the bottom because these conditions were not met. So visually, we see, oh, these all failed. We skip those conditions, and we skip the associated context blocks with them. Spy.js is a similar kind of thing. This has since been acquired by the WebStorm and kind of consumed by the WebStorm IDE. But over on the left-hand side, we have all the run loops for different events, and then the call stacks that they triggered, and then we can identify how exactly we map those call stacks into the code. Really nice, usable experience. This is a project called Earhorn, but you might have seen a similar thing from the Light Table IDE. Here we map in the runtime information of what's happening inside the browser and bringing that right into the code so we can see on mouse move all these, our client X, our client Y is live updating, and we can get a good idea of how this, while looking at code, what the state is in the browser. This is a quick shot of looking at per statement-based JavaScript profiling heat map. So we can see at the statement level or even expression level where our code is most expensive. Adobe's been doing some fantastic work inside the browser. This is an experiment for a GUI for editing CSS shapes, so we can move around inside the GUI, and we update the CSS shape polygon that's defined underneath it. And we've seen a fantastic amount of innovation when it comes to all the JavaScript frameworks that are creating better tooling for themselves. So this is React's Chrome extension. It looks like kind of standard dev tools, but it's actually completely representing their kind of application state of the world and all its properties. And similarly, this is Ember's Chrome extension. They have a fantastic view of all the promises that are active and fulfilled inside the browser. And this is inspiring a lot of browsers themselves as far as how we can better supply good information around some of these new things like promises inside the browser. So to me, what is the role of developer tools these days? Allowing us to develop fast at the speed of our thinking, letting us go as quick as we want, making debugging suck less. None of us want to be debugging. Hopefully tools can help us avoid the situation when we are debugging, but when we're there, it should be easier for us. And web development is hard. Tools can help keep us on the golden path, make sure that things are performant, make sure that things work great across devices, and tools can help fill in the gaps of the knowledge that we don't have and the things that we forgot. So I think developing for the web, for JavaScript, can be better. Everyone on this stage believes that, has been developing tools, and I'm excited to see what's next. Thanks.
Yeah, so Paul's going to duck out now because he's got the dreaded illness that I can hear a few people in the room have. So we've got his stunt double, Pavel's going to fill in on the panel for him. I can hear a few people coughing. I had it last week as well. I've managed to trace it back, talking to some of the employees of GDS who took a trip up to Newcastle, and I hear that's where this illness first came from. So it's another valuable addition to the world from Newcastle. Thanks for that, guys. I'm kidding, of course. I love Greg's. Right, first question. But before we start, these guys are developing the tools that are supposed to make your lives easier. So if they say anything you disagree with, or there's anything you want to elaborate on, then use OnSlide. If that's not working for you, please just raise your hand and I'll pick you out for a question. The first question comes from Sebastian Kiwi. Where's Sebastian over there? We got Sebastian a microphone.
In the future, can we expect to do all of our development within the browser will browser dev tools become our full IDE, or should browsers concentrate on interfacing better with IDEs?
So Macromedia brought a rendering engine to their IDE 17 years ago, but now it feels like browsers are bringing IDEs to the rendering engine, and now we have code editors that are written entirely in browser technology. Joe, I'd like you to come in on this. Do you see Firefox's dev tools becoming a full IDE?
So I think nobody would like us to say you're not allowed to use Sublime anymore, or whatever your editor is, or brackets, yeah. So that's not going to happen. On the other hand, there are things that the browser knows about how it's laying stuff out and what values are inside the JavaScript engine that you can only know by being a JavaScript engine, or by being a browser. So there are times when you will want to edit stuff inside a browser as well. So the answer, I think, is both.
Well, NJ, your editor is also a browser, right?
I wouldn't call it exactly that. I think our goal is to tie more directly, more closely to browsers. I mean, exactly what Joe said, which is that there are things that only the browser knows about, and browsers, in my opinion, should focus on what they do really well, which is inspection, right? They're inspecting the runtime. They can tell us all this information. That information, I think, for quick stuff, or when you're really focused on the browser, it makes sense to have tools in the browser, and obviously, that's a great workflow for that. But there's times when what you're really focused on is your coding, right? You're not necessarily, you don't want to live in the browser when what you're doing is writing a bunch of code and you're just trying to get stuff working and you're iterating rapidly on your code. The browser isn't maybe necessarily the best environment for that. So I think what we should really be focusing on for that aspect is to make it so that the browser information is exposed to code editors and other kinds of tooling, NoFlow, whatever, so that we can provide a much richer development experience outside of the browser as well, working with the browser.
I agree with you. That's the whole reason why I started remote debug. And Joe, I actually disagree with you because the browser today has a lot of information that is not exposed to the outer world. But I think that's a problem of the state we're in right now. Because frankly, what NJ is building with brackets is that he would love to have that information available to write better JavaScript debugging, get information about the DOM, the network stack, all these kind of things. I assume you would love to pipe them into your editor, but he's not allowed because he cannot get the information. So I think the responsibility of the browser windows is to expose that information, and that's why I think we need to start an effort like remote debug to unify and build an interface to our browsers, so other tooling vendors like brackets, telemetry, benchmarking tools can start accessing that information that right now only privileged tools like built-in div tools and browsers has access to.
So there's two different things there. Firefox developer tools work remotely. They log in through a TCP socket.
I know,
and
yeah.
all of that stuff you can get out as well as I can. So we're not keeping anything private at all. And there's a self-documenting API to get a list of everything that we are talking to. There's a second part to it, and I'm sure there's going to be another question on this, which is, should there be a standard protocol by which we debate? Do we want to? I don't want to get into that now. That's another question. I can feel it coming, and
we'll get there.
Well, is the browser as a because it has the runtime all built in? Is it in a better position to do things like even with code like autocomplete? I mean, I watch games developers work, and it seems to me that they just write a comment to make Half-Life free. And then from then they just hit the tab key over and over again. The best games developers are also the best at track and field, the arcade game. Is the browser in a better position to do stuff like that?
Yes. I mean, so we've got some stuff that does fairly deep analysis of JavaScript now, and will do some fairly clever completions that is just landing. I mean, that, to be honest, most of that technology is static, which brackets could do just as easily.
But I think there is actually value in it. We did some experiments early on. We haven't really done it in brackets around essentially querying the runtime for information. Like if you're stopped at a breakpoint, you can just ask it what's available now. And that's
there is
cool.
more stuff there, yes.
And again, we could do that from a code editor as well, as long as it's exposed through the runtime. Yeah. I guess the other point I would make, I don't know if I'm getting away from what you were asking, but is that you also want to write other kinds of code besides browser code often. And so having one environment for, hey, here I'm going to do browser stuff, and now I'm going to do my Node stuff, and I'm going to do my Ruby stuff or whatever, seems a little funny. Of course, if you were just doing JavaScript, maybe you could retarget the in-browser developer tools to Node. I mean, you can already do that with Node Inspector and things like that. But I think there's room for lots of different kinds of tools. People have lots of different workflows. They have to work with local command line tools. They have to do this and that. In terms of, the browser sort of has its role as a kind of sandbox place where you do browser stuff. And I think that, again, I think the solution is you have both kinds of tools and they talk to each other.
Yeah, like I don't think like having a contextual dev tool built into the browser is ruling out having another tool like your editor. But the kind of problem I think by having really specialized browser tools for each browser is that I, as a developer, I need to learn a new dev tool when I'm targeting another browser. So that means my workflow is kind of broken. Because if I develop for Chrome, I need to learn how to use Chrome dev tools, navigate the source code, set breakpoints. If I do it for Firefox, I need to learn their tool. And to me, that's just disconnecting my productivity.
So there's a lot we can do to help there. So you'll notice that in Firefox DevTools now, the key sequence is the same as in Chrome's. In our box model highlighter that's just landed, then all of the colors to denote borders, paddings, etc., they're the same colors. And IE is exactly the same as well. So there's stuff we can do to help there. I think there are many reasons why just saying there should be only one tool is hard. But that's that old question again, which we're going to come back to, I'm sure.
Well, before we move on to the next question, we've got a question from the floor from everyone's favourite shaver, Remington Sharp.
On the point of kind of, working with Firefox DevTools, working with Chrome DevTools, working with IE tools. So I haven't used the F12 tools yet, and when I look at the UI responsiveness, I wonder whether or not that's going to give me more insight to the responsiveness of my web page across all the browsers, or if it's just for that browser. And that's something I'm unsure. I'm quite comfortable in Chrome, and I can navigate DevTools really well, but am I debugging for Chrome, or am I debugging across in most cases, if it's bugs, yeah, sure, but for things like performance and responsiveness, I have no clue. And do we need all these different tools to target each browser?
Well, that actually leads into our next question, so I'm going to get Shane Hudson to read it out, because it kind of expands on that. Microphone for Shane.
Hi, so you rewrote my question for this. Initiatives like Remote Debug look to unify developer tools. Is this a good thing, or could it hurt the diversity of tooling?
So that's this question.
Fair point, yeah.
So some people would like to just have one tool, and obviously many tools are being created. And there's a ton of ways in which our tools are specific to what we're doing. There's new APIs that we're experimenting with. We need developer tools for that, and we wouldn't expect the Chrome team to provide us with those tools. And there are optimization techniques that will work on one browser that won't work on another. I think there are good reasons why we have an obligation to tell you about the stuff that is in our browser, that we are the only people that can tell you about it is us. We have an obligation to do that, and so that's what we're doing.
On that, if there was a standard way to get that info out of the browsers, then some third party interested in building that kind of profiling tools specific to a given task could easily go and grab the same data, feed the same HTML, JavaScript, whatever, to IE, Firefox, Chrome, grab all of those statistics and show, okay, here's how this and this thing performs in that browser.
Yeah.
And right now, that's something we don't really have.
We definitely don't want to kill innovation. I mean, it's great that you guys are doing different things, and you guys are doing different things. But as you mentioned just now, too, you're trying to make some things the same, right? Because you want the UIs to be the same. And for just basic functionality, I want to set a breakpoint, I want to do this, I want to do that. Even the more inspection stuff, it seems like it would be valuable to have at least even at the highest, shallowest level, some kind of just basically common protocol, just to make it so that we can talk the same way. And then, this browser might have certain extensions for the stuff that it does, and the other browser might have different extensions for those things. But on places where there really doesn't need to be a huge difference, at least in the core functionality, why not make it the same?
Well, I would say, Joe, first of all, I don't just want one tool. I really like that we have multiple tools available. Okay. But as a developer, I don't want to swap between multiple tools just because I'm targeting another browser. I don't want to change my workflow as a developer while I'm crafting or debugging my application and learn new workflows because I'm targeting multiple browsers. And that's the reality as front-end developers today, is that we have a bunch of different browser-specific tools that we need to learn, and it's counterproductive.
So my hope is that your workflow isn't that different. Setting a breakpoint, that kind of thing is basically very similar. So I'm hoping
But
that...
why do I need to do it twice? Once in Firefox DevTools and another one in Chrome DevTools?
Right, so two different use cases here. There's what brackets are trying to do, which is to log into our DevTools, set a breakpoint, inspect the variables, that sort of thing. That's one level of difficulty. There's a whole different level of difficulty, which is make Chrome DevTools work against Firefox.
I know, that's the prototype.
There is a massive, massive difference between those two. And what you're getting into trying to do that is all sorts of complicated problems about object lifetime in the browser and etc. There's a multitude of problems.
It's that simple.
Now, as far as the case for simple debug goes, so I mean, just think about writing an add-on for a browser, right? So we started off with Firefox add-ons which will do absolutely anything, and then there's a new API that's safer that comes on top of that, and then it looks like we're at a state where maybe we could have the Chrome API and the Firefox Jetpack API. There's some similarity there. Maybe we can extract out standard.
Well,
that feels
we've done
like
that with Grease Monkey, right?
That
The
feels
Grease
like
Monkey lets us
right. That kind of approach of giving people what they want, everything, filtering it down to what they need, standardizing it. That feels like a good approach. And I'm for that kind of process, but it's hard.
So it seems like we're all in agreement, so it's boring, right? We need to compete to innovate, and nobody's taking that away. Remy, we're sorry, 60 FPS is going to be different on Firefox from Chrome. You'll need to use different timelines. You'll need to use IE's timeline, at least for now, because those pipelines are entirely different. V8 ops you won't see with the Firefox tools. So if you're going for high tech, if you're going for performance, you need to stick with the tools for the browser as of today. Now, talking about the baseline that we've all discussed for a single IDE or whatever that will use that baseline, I think that the ball is on your side at this moment. Most or all of the browsers are exposing their protocols as of today. They are different. If you try and bridge them on your side and prove that there is a value on bridging them and talking to multiple browsers, there will be an incentive for us to standardize. Otherwise, as browser vendors, we would always want to innovate first and standardize later.
Kenneth, this kind of standardization effort that you're doing, is this something that you see going to a standards body, such as the W3 or the WG?
Well, we've been discussing that, and I think it's too early, because frankly, right now, we don't know how to build for the web. We don't know how to build web components. We don't know how to build dev tools. I think what we need to start and agreeing upon is the baseline, like, is our remote debugging, is that going to use HTTP? Is it a WebSocket? What is the very fundamental protocol? And then we can discuss all the API details, like how is the Firefox API, how is the Chrome API. But the problem is, like, if you're not a dev tool developer and you want to interface with the browser, that is so goddamn hard. And what I see when I look at what Visual Studio or Adobe are doing, then they're sitting and inventing ways to do instrumentation to extract information out of the web app so they can protect that information and bring it into their editors. And frankly, I think that's a complete waste of time, because that's the responsibility of the browser windows. You guys are building the platform. You should enable the ecosystem of tooling vendors we have out there to build tools for the web. Right now, you only allow yourself to build for the web. And I think that's not good enough.
So can I suggest a way forward? And the way forward here is that we start off with something like a JavaScript API, which allows you to do debugging in a browser, whether that's remotely, whether it's from one web page to another. I mean, that would be pretty cool, to write a debugger in a web page to look at the other web pages, security issues, obviously. Ignore the protocol to start off with. Do it via a JavaScript API. That's the way forward, and that is something that you can build on bit by bit. But that's going to take time.
Well, on a related subject, I've got the next question from Remy Sharp again. So we get Remy a microphone.
Can we just wire Remy up?
Yeah. So my question was rewritten as well.
I just made them more extreme to be more interesting, right?
So currently, I've got to read this. Currently, features launch before they have DevTools support, e.g. promises, server-sent events, web audio, and so on. Is this fair to developers? Should we be ensuring we're developing features that are inherently debuggable? I don't actually agree with the question you raised.
Well, you say your bit first, if you want.
Well, experiments come before standards, right? It has to, and that's the only way we're going to make any progress. So it should be debuggable, but I want to be able to get in there and debug it whilst the browsers catch up with me as a developer. Server-side events.
So you
really
just
simple.
answered your own question. So that's.
Well, no. Server-side events is a really simple example. We've got tools for debugging WebSockets. We don't have tools for debugging server-side events.
Yeah.
It's hard for us to go ahead and debug that, and why aren't browsers making that easier for us? Butcher that question of yours.
I don't think we have a well-established process of debuggability for new features. We try to have everything debuggable by the time it leaves experiment or is no longer behind a flag. So Shadow DOM is probably a good example of that. Shadow DOM appeared, debuggability was there, also behind a flag, and promises are already there, but there's no built-in support for them yet. We're working on it. So for us, the measure is feature hitting stable. That's an absolute requirement for us. But there's no sort of better process, and it's entirely driven by our customers. So if you file bugs about lack of debuggability of experimental features, it gains stars. We will definitely look into it.
The promises bit is really interesting because there's a huge thread in the spec discussion about promises where they were saying we're not going to have a .done method that a lot of other promises have because that method is just there for debugging, and we shouldn't be putting things into the spec that are just there for debugging. Is that something? How are you looking to? What's your plan for debugging things like promises? Is it something you're looking at?
Yes. So we've got this thing called tag stacks, which is the thing that you see in Chrome for looking back through async things. I think it would be good to have some way of listing all promises that have been unfulfilled in some way. That would be extremely handy. Yeah, we'd like to do this. Just, I mean, our dev tools are written in JavaScript. We'd like it for our own purposes, if nothing else, you know. So, we're working on it. I don't know what more I can say than that.
So, I've got a question more for the audience, I guess. Like, given all these tools we have, like variable watching, breakpoints, who here still uses console.log as their first bit of debugging? Right, and I find, and I do this as well, and I find this crazy because just writing debugger is less characters, and that would let you inspect it. It's like shaving with a knife, when there's a perfectly good razor blade there for you. Why do we think people like ghetto debugging?
Well, I think it's because you don't have to navigate an interface, right? It's like I know the piece of information I want, so let me just put it in the log statement. I don't have to go twirling through things, right? The flip side is you have to know in advance what you want. So that was kind of the idea behind Theseus, and I think this is like what some of the other DevTool stuff is doing, and this kind of omniscient debugging thing that's been around. I think it's been in the Java world for a while. Is that you don't have to think in advance about what information you need. You just get it, and you can get it afterwards. You just sort of use it, and then you figure it out. And I think that's a really powerful paradigm. The problem is that it has to capture lots and lots of data, so it'd be interesting to see that go farther. Another thing to Remy's point is, and this is something Theseus does, and I think other things do, is I think there's actually a lot of power in building debugging tools through instrumentation, right? Is that you instrument the JavaScript, and you can, like promises, you could instrument the promises library and figure that stuff out. So actually having like a common library for doing that kind of instrumentation for debugging, just purely in JavaScript without requiring browser support, would be kind of nice. And Theseus has, I think, the beginning of that has like a generic instrumentation library.
I think aliens are trying to contact us, but we'll just ignore it for now. I wonder if it's entirely the UI thing. I mean, it reminds me of an argument I got into at school. It was typical of my sense of humor, this, but because it was about urinals, and I pointed out that the design flaw of urinal is that they lend themselves to a certain amount of splashback. And I said, this is something we should fix. And he said to me, no, like, if you don't get the splashback, how can you tell you're pissing hard like a real man? And this is someone who doesn't enjoy being showered with his own effluent, but he finds it affirms his masculinity. And is that what we're seeing with console.log? I'm just using the bare minimum of the tools to prove I'm a great coder. I'm not going to use all of it's proving I'm not a good coder if I have to use all of the browser's help.
I'm going to stop using console.log. I don't know. I'm comfortable from now on.
I don't know what this console log thing is. There's alert, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Maybe that's a good time to move on to the. Oh no, we've got a question in the audience.
Just one thing, so I like the urinal explanation, but I think another part is the element of asynchronicity. So sometimes it's quite hard to know what order things are triggered in. So if you've got events and things like that, and we find that often that just makes it easier to see the flow and the sequence of things. So maybe it's the element of a lot of things are asynchronous in the browser, and that it's hard to visualize that and to reason about that. Is there a way to make that better in the tools?
Wouldn't it be nice to have kind of this map where you can see events flow in the browser? I don't know.
I mean, that is an interesting thing about the flow-based approach. I mean, there's been flow-based programming languages for a long time, but it's kind of interesting to me that we haven't seen it for JavaScript. And when you're dealing with large amounts of asynchronous, I mean, this is the #1 source of bugs I think we have in brackets in general, is just dealing with asynchronous crap, right? And so having visual ways to trace that stuff is really important. So Thesis does a little bit of that, but yeah. I mean,
one thought here, what if we enable on a platform level, like new development approaches like this to surface up, right? What if we allowed external developers to build new kind of tools for the platform, so it wouldn't only be the DevTools teams?
We do have a question about that coming up, so we'll say that for now. We've got a question at the back.
No, it's just an extension on the same thing, really. I find for mobile development, a lot of the time I don't want to jump into the DevTools because I'm working on a very fine grain, something to do with focus and blur events or touch start and various things like that. And jumping into DevTools actually interrupts that flow. So being able to look back as to what's happened in the last 10 seconds would be really useful. So Thesis, that kind of thing built into DevTools, just a snapshot of what has just happened.
Have any of you guys looked into omniscient?
That's why I don't use debugger a lot of the time.
In the DevTools, have you guys thought about looking into that? Like capturing state?
Yeah. So we, outside of DevTools, tracing has this feature. It can record what's happening, and it shows you a sliding window of what's just happened. It is not traced into the content world, though, so we don't operate nodes and JavaScript there. And in DevTools, we haven't started doing anything with it.
We're going to move on to the next topic. We've got a question from Cornell. Where are you? Microphone for that now.
Hi. There are lots of deprecated APIs and bad practices that browsers could detect and warn about. How can tools guide developers towards better code without expecting developers to run a specific profiler or manually interpret the results?
I really liked Firebug for this, actually, because it had always visible a little error counter at the bottom, and knowing that other Firebug users would see that sort of spurred me on. I don't want errors on my page, because imagine the shame of it, you know. Is this a useful pattern?
So yeah, one of the things that we are putting serious thought into doing is to splitting the web console in two. So one part of it would be logging, and one part of it would be JavaScript. And then, so we're putting lots and lots of extra warnings into the console at the moment. There are all sorts of security things, like there are cause errors in there, etc. And I think we should be having more of them, and that basically encompasses what you're saying. But it's going to make a complete mess of the web console if we do that. So we'll have 2 panels. That's what we're doing. So that's what we're doing. That's what we're probably planning to do. We've not. Yeah, it's not code yet. That's what the plan is.
We are not quite splitting the consoles, but we're also working on more warnings on deprecations, and not only deprecations, but the performance issues and potential bottlenecks for everything.
I would love to see some linting tools built into the DevTools that are contextual, right? So while the app is running, then it could detect, hey, this API is being used, it's deprecated, these CSS like this, so they hey, you're doing something that is causing jank. That would be nice to have an ongoing checklist of seeing stuff, right? Instead of just a warning in a console.
Right, so one of the things we have, I think right now on Firefox OS is on top of the display, on top of your web page, you get a little thing floating over the top which tells you about JavaScript, it tells you about jank, tells you about that sort of thing. There's a bunch of little things that will do that.
So there's also a lot of things could be done using instrumenting code. We have a protocol API that allows installing a preprocessor that would instrument all the content JavaScript and trace it, log it, and do whatever you want with it. So we expect a lot of innovation to come from there, from the outside, that would be analyzed and promote to the tool itself.
Is that shipping already?
It is there for quite some time.
Do we see that users aren't, because we've got tools like Timeline, Dai had Chrome has as well. Are we seeing users use that, or do we want to be in a better position where we want to tell people, hey, you have layout thrashing going on, without them having to go to that and like say, look, this is what layout thrashing is, this is how you can find out where it's happening, but we know just from a small little test it is happening.
It wasn't the question, it was the answer, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Can we have that? And when can we have it?
No, but I think that is the solution to proper web performance, better information to developers, just like YSlow did it for web performance, right? That you had most developers just want to have a checklist to see, hey, I need to complete these 500 issues of what I have in my app, and then I'm good, right?
Yeah, we do want to make timeline more popular. We want to draw attention to it, and we will do that, and you'll see warnings.
Excellent. That's cool. Right, we'll move on to the next question. This is from Kyle Simpson. Where's Kyle? Over there, microphone for Kyle.
All right, so disclosure of bias. A couple of years ago, I worked with Joe Walker on the Firefox Developer Tools team, so you just have to keep that in mind when I ask these questions. First is, what's stopping every browser from providing headless access and automation, kind of like Phantom.js, but for testing and processing? And that's not just JavaScript, that's the entire stack with HTML and CSS, but sort of headless into the tool. So this shifts us away from what's happening in the browser to happening outside the browser.
Pavel, Joe, ship it.
So the very short answer to your question is nothing. What's stopping us? Nothing. There's a fallback question, which is what actually do you want from headless? Is this, yeah, what's the question behind it?
I want Phantom.js, but I want it from the browser itself. I don't want to have some forked other project. I want to be able to spin up kind of like a UI web view
So it's,
Firefox
okay.
and a UI web view of Chrome.
So it's testing.
And some other tool to do testing, regression, performance, all this.
Right, okay. So yes, there is Slimer.js, which is basically this sort of thing. It's not 100% headless. It's nearly headless. It's kind of maybe here. So yes, I mean that's as much as I can say. I mean I'm kind of out of my depth here a bit, because this is a lot of this. The answer to this question is kind of like deeper browser engineering than as DevTools engineering. We've had new APIs recently that look like they that should make this a lot easier, and I'm fairly sure that Slimer is working on those APIs. That's all I have more.
Yeah, we have a new version of WebDriver is implemented on top of the DevTools protocol, so you can actually drive things in the browser. And there's also a telemetry API that allows headless operation, and that's actually how Chrome team is testing against regressions. So whenever you have a content that you don't want to regress in scrolling, you're using telemetry to implement a perf test for it. So it is there, it is publicly available, you can use it, but it's not standardized, and it's Chrome.
But I mean, WebDriver is enough of a standard, right? I mean, there's that inside Firefox now. Some internal Firefox tests use that. So that's becoming more of a cross-browser standard. So, I mean, let me come back to your, why headless? You want to be able to run it without touching it, as opposed to you don't want to see it, right? Because nearly headless is okay if it's not a visual problem. If what you want is automated testing, you don't matter if the screen flicks briefly.
So there is the testing side of it.
Right.
There's the testing side of it, but there's also a functionality side of it. People use Phantom.js to spin up a headless browser that they can render screenshots from or things like that. That's the sort of thing I'm talking about, being able to, in the build process, spin up a tool for regression testing or pulling out rendering or analyzing the way things are working, all those sorts of things.
And part of the problem really is that Phantom.js is not, you think it's Chrome or something, but it's not. It's kind of Chrome from a few years ago with some other weird bits and minus that. And yes, I think it would be nice if we were better at that.
I want to point out that developer tools actually do matter here, because when you do for the testing purposes, a lot of times you want to extract information that would be available in developer tools as a part of those components, because if this is a part of your test cycle, you might want to audit that things did not happen, trace, do other
yeah.
So it should be a part of that API.
Yeah.
Was that something that remote debug would be able to help? If we had a headless version of these browsers, could then
I see that as a natural extension, right? If we had a generic interface to the browser, no matter if it had this instance of Chrome or Safari, then we would be able to interface with the browser. We would be able to take a tool like Chrome's telemetry and use it across browsers to do comparison of browser performance. And it would enable a different generation of tools as I see it, and things that we now do specific to Phantom.js and specific to Slimer. I just want to interface with the browsers. And WebDriver is not enough because WebDriver is focused only on automated testing. I want to get information about timeline events and all these other things that the browser currently has, right?
We got a question from the audience over here.
This is more a user perspective kind of question, but with window.error being so flaky, is it possible for like the browsers, for the dev tools, when they record an error, to actually like ping an endpoint somewhere, which would, so you would specify in the head this, you know, on error ping my server with the error details in the stack trace. So that way, if there is a complete JS failure due to cause or some other unseen event, that you would have an automated kind of, the browser would tell you this and kind of give you user metrics and statistics.
Don't you? So you want to get that information from the field, or you want to be pinged when you're running locally? I didn't get that.
No, so say we had an error where we put cross-origin anonymous on Google Maps script, and basically Google deployed a new version of Maps, which completely broke all the JavaScript. Nothing could run. So there was no error reporting, no nothing, because basically Chrome said, we don't want to run this because there's a security error. So would it be possible for the browser to actually ping, so say if you had like a meta tag saying, on error ping my error reporting, and basically you'll just send the stack trace.
Isn't there spec around this?
This is one of the things that native people say. Native is way better than the web at this. It's getting metrics on what the hell's going on out there. We should be better at this.
Well, this goes back to the point before about, like, do we build features that have debugging built into them? I mean, we saw that Promises didn't, but I think what you're referring to, CSP, has a specific feature for logging back. Yeah, do we need something like that for error logging? Question from the audience, sir.
Yeah, just, sorry, back to that. What's actually your problem with window on error? Because at The Guardian, we do exactly what you say, and it works perfectly.
No, but like say if there's a cause error, that wouldn't be reported on window error. So you would never get that. So basically, say if you deploy the script and you've got the headers, the window error would never report to you you've had a cause error. Or like if basically say you managed to put, you missed a colon in your window error statement or something, and that would break your reporting rules.
So something to pipe what you would see as an error in console to your server.
The whole of your lint panel to redirect the whole of that lot back to you. You know, that would that seems like a reasonable.
It's very flaky and it doesn't really work most of the time, so it would be quite handy to have just a meta tag which would like tell you what was going on.
I feel like there could be some privacy issue or something. You need to think about it, but.
Even if it kind of went through like Google and then they like anonymized it and you got it like half an hour later.
So is this helping privacy or?
Scary.
A question at the front here, and we'll get a microphone.
Hi, so I kind of tried to push around WSVC the performance in the tooling group to do exactly what you guys were talking about. It's great to hear that Chrome has this implementation and telemetry APIs. So my question is more as a call to action. So I tried to push it in the group, but so far in both of those groups, the tooling group and the web performance group, so far nobody was really interested in going forward with this. If you guys have it, and why just don't put a first version together of what we all have there and try to draft of what can be standardized, what cannot be standardized, and start working on it?
I think we're just waiting for it to prove itself usable and user-friendly. And for now, we're just innovating and moving rapidly there. And so we just need time, and we need more initiative from you, from your side, more pushing for it.
That was my first way of pushing you, so go ahead there.
Well, we're going to move on to our last question, which is a good question to end on, and it's from Remy Sharp again. So we can get Remy a microphone. Strap it to him.
Okay, so I'd like to contribute to developer tool. I would like contributing to developer tools to be made easier, not just adding a panel or tweaking tweaking functionality. How can I get involved. And I had originally tacked on this. Things like Grease Monkey made it very, very easy to hack the page and make it improve for me as the visitor or the user or the developer. I'd like to see that kind of like super low barrier of entry for all of the dev tools, except for Apple, because they don't play ball.
Jake and me spent an hour yesterday making all these questions really short.
Yeah, I know, right? So what do we need to, if a developer wants to get involved in Chrome DevTools, what can they do?
We are not particularly good at that. So if you want to contribute to core DevTools, the entry bar is fairly high because we are a part of Blink source tree. So it's not good. The extensions API is not rich enough for your needs, right? And it's not rich for a reason. We don't want people to fight for resources and break each other. So we're just trying to get better at that, and in both ways, in contributing to core and providing more richer extensions APIs. But for now, you get a wiki or something, you follow the instructions, and you manage to upload a patch. We feel a bit sorry for you, but that's about it for Chrome as of today. So it's bad.
So we can do. I mean, Firefox. You can hack anything on it. You can, it's all JavaScript in our DevTools, so there isn't a limit to what you can do. The downside is next month it will break. We are trying to create some APIs that are more standardized that won't break. And we spent some time with the Ember guys working out what they would like, and we've done stuff with Angular to try and have custom extensions there. If there's something that we're doing that doesn't help you, then shout at us and we'll.
Thing is, that's more kind of like high level developer. The experienced developer can do that kind of thing. I'm talking about. Grease Monkey is a really good example. People could just pick up a Grease Monkey script and install it for themselves to make. I make my banking site readable using Grease Monkey.
Yeah.
I want to be able to do that with like DevTools. Like being able to bump the font was a huge deal for me because I don't like tiny fonts, and now like both Firefox and Chrome do it. But before I had to tweak a style sheet, which was a little bit more of a barrier of entry. It's kind of making that.
So you want a Grease Monkey script to plug into DevTools in effect, that kind of
sort
thing.
of. I'm really talking about kind of the low barrier of entry, really, to make it easy for anyone here to make their DevTools better.
Right. So, would you want a better deployment for it, or you want it for yourself?
For myself, because once you kind of go right, here's Grease Monkey type access, then it's going to be a complete cluster. Yeah. But I'm talking about for the individual to be able to hack their own DevTools.
So what we
I got an example where that is useful. In Yahoo, for example, I wanted to fix things and made comps and make Photoshop things, and never anything worked. But when I wrote a Grease Monkey script and sent people the link, all of a sudden they saw the page change and basically would interact with the change already.
Right.
So a scriptable interface to the developer tools would allow me to do that as well. We don't want to reinvent Grease Monkey, but making it as easy to show what a debugging step would look like, or a tutorial how debugging works in a JavaScript way of scripting the DevTools would be really, really useful.
So one thing we're trying to do, this is a road, and we're some way down this road. What would be very cool is if you could simply clone a repo on Git, which is our DevTools, and you could now say in your browser, don't look inside yourself, look over there, and it's all just text files. We're not, actually there's quite a few bits of that work already. Like you can already say, don't look inside yourself, look there. It's not a separate repo.
You can already do that with Chrome today, point it to another folder.
Yeah, Chrome has it for a couple of years, but it's not sort of getting traction. It helps the adoption, it helps getting more contributors, because it's easier to set up that environment and hack on DevTools. But people don't use it for like on a regular basis. It's just too inconvenient.
But did you advertise it?
Yeah, I think so.
It's
there.
It
has been advertised quite some when the remote debugging appeared, because remote debugging was proved by the external front end running as a web page externally. But we could do something like that.
Yeah, because that's a big starting step. Being able to just say, okay, instead of loading up the internal DevTools, point it to the copy that I've got, and then I can start hacking.
You have a button in DevTools that's like fork DevTools, and it spits all the code out for you in another directory, and you can edit it.
Well, and that is us unfortunately out of time. I can see a lot of people have extra questions, but the very best of the people on this panel will be in the pub this evening. The people who go home early don't really care about you. But that brings us onto a break, so you can grab a coffee before the next session, which is build process. But thank you very much to the panelists.
Things. I know it's really hot. We've asked them to turn the air conditioning up, so hopefully it will get colder. And the AV guys say, when you want to contribute, please stand up so they can find you with the cameras. We have a 15-minute break, so come back in 15 minutes.
Sorry about that.
Hi everyone, can you take your seats as quickly as possible? We're actually a few minutes behind schedule and we're going out on the live stream, so get back in your seats.
Right, all right.
You're live on YouTube, mate.
Just talking about splunking on the back end. What?
Sorry about this. You're going to get cut a little bit short, like 5 minutes short.
Oh, that's fine. Given what I already said to you, I think that's fine. So I shouldn't.
Okay, can I go live, please? Okay, everybody, can I have your attention? Hi, everyone, let's get started. We're a few minutes behind schedule and we are live on the web, so we need to, keep this show on the road. So our next panel is on build process, and I'm really pleased to welcome back Ben Vinegar, who was at Edge 2 as a panelist, and said to me that he would really enjoy the opportunity to moderate a panel next time. So here he is, and he's not at all nervous. And so please welcome Ben Vinegar.
Hello, Tess. So yeah, this is the build process panel, which thematically is all about how do we take our source code in whatever form it may be and transpile, pre-process, minify, optimize, etc. until it arrives in its final form. My name is Ben Vinegar. I'm a lead front engineer at Discuss. I also wrote a book called Third Party JavaScript. It's pretty terrible. I have 5 wonderful panelists with me. First, there's Kyle Simpson, who you may know as the author of Lab.js. He's also an author. He's writing a book called You Don't Know JS. Nick Fisher, who works at SoundCloud, and he designs and implements a lot of their build systems, SoundCloud being a relatively large client-side application with some cool stuff going on. Adi Osmani, who develops To-Do MVC and Yeoman, which is a scaffolding tool, working with Grunt. And he also works on Chrome Dev Tools. And then Sebastian Golasch, who works for Deutsche Telekom. I practiced pronouncing that for a while. Working on a product there that also uses sort of like older traditional build tools, like, I don't know if older is the right word, but with Maven combined with Grunt and some client-side stuff. And then lastly, I have Gareth Rushgrove, who works for the UK government, working on a big project that involves modernizing a whole bunch of UK government websites and bring them into the modern era. And with that said, Gareth is just going to start us off with a quick presentation.
So, yeah, slides up. Do I have to do anything? Hey. Ooh. Hey. Okay, your build process needs you, because it's probably not as good as it could be. Maybe it is. But what is a build process? I think, and what we're talking about really is it's a way of sharing common actions as much as anything else. If it's just you doing something, well, and you're just doing it once, that's not really a build process. But actually storing it as something that you can come back to, or more commonly, storing it as something that your team can come back to is really important. Because frankly, people suck at repetitive tasks. If I ask someone to do something over and over again, they'll probably do it subtly different. A build process is always about standardizing those repetitive tasks. And some of that's to do with the fact that words can mean different things to different people. If I say, oh, can you minimize this bit of JavaScript for me? People will do it differently. And that's probably no good in an environment where you're trying to work together. You end up with different results. Someone might take longer. That's no good. We need to standardize. But your build process is software. And certainly for some people, the people come to sort of certainly front-end engineering, front-end sort of web development from lots of different paths. And not all of them will think of themselves as software developers. Tough. You're a software developer. If you're anywhere near a build process, you're a software developer. Live with it. But what are we building? What are the sorts of types of things that we're putting into our build process? And Ben mentioned a few things that will be common to lots of people in the room, sort of CSS pre-processing, templating, Kyle, bundling, minification, linting, testing, optimization, transpiling. There's lots of things we're doing with our code. And there's lots of tools we're using. I mean, two of the sort of like common ones at the moment, certainly in the sort of front-end space, appear to be sort of like Gulp and Grunt. Grunt, this was a few days ago, but I bet it's about the same today. Maybe it's less today because we're all in this room, or watching on the video. Like 30,000 installs of this every day. That sounds quite a lot. That's a lot of interest. That's a lot of people. There's 2,500 like Grunt plugins, and I'll come back to why that might not be great in a moment. There's actually 450 Gulp plugins, and that's a tool that's not been around anywhere near as long. But I said I'll come back to why that might not be good in a moment. Contrib.json is a Grunt plugin, and there's one for Gulp, brilliant. And there's Grunt Coffee and Gulp Coffee, and there's Broccoli Coffee as well. And at some point, and there definitely will be someone in this room, someone watching this, who's building, oh no, I'm building another one, and hoping someone comes along and builds another one dash coffee and JSHIN and everything else. And we know there's 2,500 Grunt plugins. Do we want 2,500 Gulp ones and Broccoli ones and everything else? And it's not just about the sort of, I think there's probably a lot of front-end people in the room. There's probably not like people writing JavaScript, writing CSS, writing HTML sort of most of their time. Is that fair to say? Any person going like, I'm basically just a Java programmer? That's all happy with that. But we're all working in environments where there probably is a backend, and that might not be written in JavaScript. Maybe you're using Node, maybe you're not. Maybe it's Ruby, maybe it's Python, maybe it's C#. It doesn't matter. There's a lot of other things going on around you that also have build processes. And there's loads of build tools, whether it's Make or Make, Maven, Nan, SPT. There's loads of these. There's a bit at the bottom that says 2 points for each tool, -5 if you liked using Maven. Ultimately, building software isn't new. It's happening all over the place. And standardizing things in silos probably isn't enough. Even when it comes to sort of typical tasks around front-end engineering, a lot of those have plugins or projects related to other build tools that are doing it, whether that's sort of multiple versions of things like Django static compiler or compressor versus sprockets in Rails versus aesthetic in PHP. Like, there's this spiraling mass of all these things doing fundamentally the same jobs. And really, sort of everything old is new again. Building software is not new. It's maybe new to, these tools are new, Grunt and Gulp. There's a lot of interest around sort of programming in JavaScript at the moment. There's a lot of new tools coming around, but this isn't fundamentally a new activity. And some of the same mistakes have been made, some of the learnings are not being taken forward. Make is older than you, probably. I wrote this before turning up. I think that's broadly true. Unless you're 37, Make is older than you. There's a few people here who probably look older than 37, but I reckon most of you, I'm going to go for Make is older than you. Make is a build tool. If you haven't seen it, it looks like this. If you're thinking, wait a minute, where's all the rest of the code? You can think, well, maybe you should be using Make rather than Grunt. And do you know how many Make plugins there are? I don't think there are any. That's probably going to be completely untrue. But basically, there aren't really Make plugins. There aren't really plugins for ls as a Unix command tool. The reason is because Unix pipes are amazing, or the concept of simply chaining things together by sending information between them. So grep ls doesn't have a grep plugin or a sort plugin, and it's just about Unix command line tools being able to be chained together. It doesn't matter that these things could be written in different languages by different people at different times. We don't have to customize them all via plugin models. And I think actually, I don't do a lot of front-end stuff. I haven't done for quite a while. So actually, I did a whole bunch of research and into sort of like what people were doing to be on this panel. And I thought, as a community, it seems that there's a lot of effort reinventing the wheel. And this isn't just true for this community. That's true of basically programmers, myself included. But we invariably invent things, like reinvent things in our language of choice, and sometimes in our tool of choice. But the thing we often miss is that's our language and tool of choice at the moment, and that probably changes over time. And so anything that we can do to minimize that is probably a good thing to think about. Because we can make things better. And ultimately, like, things are better now than they were before. They're like, having tools is good. This is not about saying, oh, we shouldn't have done any of that, like throw it all away. It's about how can we make it a lot more sustainable? How can we learn from maybe like 20-odd years, 30-odd years of other programming communities' build processes? So what is the most valuable unit of sharing? Is it a plugin? How can we build community consensus and like avoid the plugin apocalypse? I like that. I think there's a genuine problem there. Can we share entire pipelines as well as tools? And it's fine sharing the individual bits, but actually we probably then all take a collection of things together and string it together to do the same thing. And actually, can we share the pipeline? And is that a better unit of sharing? And importantly, how do we break down sort of some of these artificial programming language silos? Because even if you're thinking, well, actually, my career is going to be all about front-end engineering. It's all going to be about JavaScript and CSS and HTML. And they're going to change. They're going to evolve. They're going to get better. The tools around it's going to get better. But that's what I'm going to do. You probably do it in a context where other people around you are writing different programming languages. And how do we make it so there's not that culture clash, there's not that us versus them? How do we bring these things together? They're just some of the things that were in my head and some of the things that I sort of care about. My other panelists might violently disagree with some of that. So with that, we can go on to the panel.
So thanks, Gareth. I think that was a pretty good way to start us off. There's a question I'm looking for. Oh, God. As I kind of browse this thing that's been moved around. Oh, boy. I'm going to ask on Cornel Lisinski. And also, I just want to say, I feel that we butchered your question slightly. And if you would like to go, go original with this, please do so.
So, is eliminating a need for a build process a goal of web standards? For example, should CSS adopt all the features of CSS preprocessors, or should it avoid duplicating them?
So one of the really nice things about the extensible web manifesto has been, the community starts to iterate on features in languages like JavaScript and tools like JavaScript and so on. And once we reach a nice consensus there, we can then go and move on to standardizing those features. So in the case of CSS and preprocessors, we've already started to see things like variables actually land and go from things like Sass and less directly into CSS. The same thing is being done with mixins. I think that it's perhaps not necessarily the browser's responsibility to provide hooks into your build process, like a pre-process step or a post-process step. That seems to be something that would be better left up to additional tools or something on the server side. But I think that we currently have a good system in place for actually landing things that the community is doing and finding useful, like patterns, directly inside native primitives. And I'd like to see us continue doing that.
So I want to jump in, because they asked me to be on the panel so that I could disagree with everyone. So, so I actually think it's a terrible idea to standardize all of these things into CSS and into HTML and JavaScript. For example, I think it would be an awful world if the browser had a transpiler for every one of the 1,000 languages that are out there. There are things that belong in our tool sets, there are things that belong in our technology, and there are things that belong in a build process. And I draw a very distinct line between them. So transpiling, a lot of things that we see in CS preprocessors are things that I think aren't necessarily great to be in the CSS language. They're things that tools could do for you. So I don't think it's a good idea at all to go down that sort of slippery slope of saying anything that I can dream up should just drop into a standard. I think build processes are there for a reason, and I don't see them going away any day.
If anyone's got a way of just dreaming stuff up and dropping it into a standards process, though, I'd like to hear about it.
That would be awesome.
I think fundamentally the friction around standardizing things is it takes time and it's hard for good reason. So actually I think the answer is yes, but realistically the rate that happens is slow for good reasons. Until we can broadly all agree on something, then it's not going to get standardized. And we're definitely not going to broadly agree on everything at any time soon. So therefore, it's the stuff that we can fight about that goes in our different build processes.
I'd kind of agree with Kyle here as well, that I think one of the real benefits and the reason that JavaScript and CSS got to where it is now is because it didn't do that ever. Like, it is a very bare bones language in JavaScript that has let all of us then come up with these new tools and these new things to build upon a very basic level. And I think that if we decide to do that, say 10 years ago, we might have a very different language today.
So I just to sort of like tack onto this, which is that, historically, have we even done a good job of, when we take, features from other languages and bring them into JavaScript or CSS, like, people talk to me a lot about we shouldn't even be using jQuery, but we should be doing straight DOM. But I find that those API methods are still pretty like verbose and they're not very, fun to use. So if we went along the path of, bringing a lot of these, let's say less and Sass features into CSS, like, would we even get it right? Would it be like fun to work with?
I think it's okay for these tools to inform standards. But I think we should draw a line and say, not just because somebody can put something into a build process doesn't mean that it will ever belong in a standard. So there's plenty of good examples, for better or worse, that CoffeeScript informed ES6. And I think those, I don't like all of them, but that's good that we were able to inform that. But I don't think that it would be a good idea for CoffeeScript to natively start being in the browser. I think that's a build step.
So I think the TLDR of that is it looks like it's probably not the best idea for everything that's possible inside a build process today to be baked into the browser. We're always going to fundamentally differ when it comes to our tools. And there are going to be some patterns that it makes sense to eventually land natively. But on the whole, if we can do something outside of that process, let's keep rolling with that.
And also, in my opinion, the good part of using a tool in a build process, using processing before it is in a browser, is like if it doesn't make sense, you can throw it away. Once it's been in the browser, it's there forever, period. And that's a huge problem. That's also why standards are like slow in the common sense, but it's the right thing.
Mm-hmm. There was also a second part to Cornell's question, the original question. I don't know that he touched on it exactly. I was hoping that he would. but it was about should the idea of pre-processing itself be a standards feature? Like if we are basically in agreement that it seems like most of our code is being taken from one source into another, is there an idea of like having a a pre-process step versus a runtime step? I'm looking for a nod from you. Does this seem, have I captured that?
So by that I was thinking whether CSS should be optimized for being preprocessed, whether it should have syntax or features that are not for humans to type manually, but for preprocessors to generate, for example.
Like a $sign in JavaScript.
Any comments on that?
Well, I'll jump in since I happen to be experimenting with what I call CSS templating as opposed to CSS pre-processing. And I think that's a better way to go. So again, what I said was there's several things that we've been informed by Less and Sass that do belong in the CSS language, and I'm glad that we've got tools that have sort of standardized on what those things are, like, for instance, being able to drop in a value, or for instance, being able to nest a rule or something like that. But there's a whole bunch of other stuff that I think should be externalized. So I think we can draw those distinct lines, and I think the tools can standardize on the stuff that is smart, but that's obviously a gray area. I mean, it's hard for any one person to say, here's where the line goes. So the community, I think, needs to be more responsible about not just looking at the new shiny thing that somebody dreamed up, but saying, well, really, should that actually be adopted, or should that stay in sort of the user lane? I think we need, as a community, to be more responsible with that decision.
Okay. On that note, I'm going to bring us to our next question. I'm going to call on from the audience Ernesto Jimenez.
So the question is, much of the new tools and build processes are growing within the Node.js community and depend on the Node stack and NPM. Do you think this dependency might be limiting in the future?
So let's talk about Node for a moment. So Node has been growing in popularity quite extensively over the last couple of years. It currently has something like 35,000 downloads a day. I think 0.1 was downloaded something like 1 million times. And so Node's popularity is increasing, which is great. At the same time, you have to remember that the long tail, so not necessarily the people in this room, but people who are still afraid of the command line, people who want to be able to optimize their pages and their apps and so forth, but don't necessarily feel like it's a nice place to go into the command line. They still feel it's like really, really scary. It's those people that we actually need to come up with solutions for. There do exist tools that can help with this stuff. The long tail generally like working with GUIs, and we can tie that stuff back to Node, whether we're using something like Node WebKit or additional tooling, so that they just have to say, well, here's my project, or here are the directories I'm working with. Can you just bind these to the different tools that might do pre-processing, post-processing, and so forth. So I don't think that using Node is something that's stopping us. It's just going to be about sort of improving awareness of how okay it is to use things like Node and the command line when you're actually working.
I think coming at that from a completely different point as well is that sort of Node's a runtime, and yeah, whether someone's using command line or another tool, it's something that's executing our code. For some environments, that is a barrier to entry. They're not going to put Node on their environment. That's fine. That's going to happen. One thing that is happening though, because I think there's been a lot of interest in the tools that are being built on top of it, is people, and there's certainly some work around basically embedding a Node, basically a Node runtime in the JVM for environments which are saying like, we're not going to install this random new tool, but we are happy with running all this Java stuff. So I think that becomes a less limiting factor over time. The tools will be able to be run in different places.
So to build off of that, I think what it gets to is, I would wholeheartedly say we should standardize on JavaScript for driving these tools. But Node is the tool right now. It won't be the tool necessarily 5 years from now or 10 years from now, because Node wasn't the first server-side JavaScript engine, and it's certainly not the last. We had one from Netscape in the very early days of JavaScript. It didn't survive. Rhino, and now Nashorn. I mean, we've got a whole bunch of other environments. So I think to the extent that it's possible for a tool author to build a developer tool, a build process tool in JavaScript, and try to be as agnostic as possible, try to put as few touch points to the specific host environment as possible, then we see that 5 years from now, when there's something that supersedes Node, it won't be as hard to convert that tool over. Most of the logic will survive. So I think we should be doing that.
So, Go ahead.
So if we think like 5 years ago, we didn't have Node, and back then we did like build scripts with Ant, this XML Java thingy, and maybe put a Rhino jar in there because we only knew JavaScript, and so we could script something up that does a little bit on top of it. It was hard to configure, and so with the rise of Node, front-end developers who were capable of writing JavaScript and couldn't write some other languages or only CSS and HTML besides.
Or didn't want to.
Or didn't want to. Well, just had the power to tap into that build process without just learning another language or whatever, or another tool. And so they're now familiar with the stack and they can embrace like this whole plugin ecosystem or whatever. And I think that's a really good thing.
I want to cut you guys off and actually just bring up the second part of that question, which we haven't touched on at all, which was NPM. I think everyone seems to be pretty positive on Node, but what about this idea that there's a huge dependence on NPM as a package manager, and then the NPM repository, for which I think it's fair to say there's been some bumpiness too.
What are you talking about? I don't know.
Well, bumpiness, just in case to contextualize this, like for example, I think a month ago they changed the way that they changed their certificates, their security certificates, without notice. And then I think a lot of people who had depended on Node, they just couldn't download packages for a day, and there was no instructions, there was no communication about what had happened. Just as an example point, it's not the only one. Would anyone want to touch up on this? Perhaps I'm going to start with you.
I think like that's going to be a problem if you're relying on any third party to host your the things that you need for your application. I don't think it's unique to NPM. I think NPM is solving a really good problem right now. But if something were to replace that in the future, then I think that it shouldn't be that difficult to actually transition across to that, or even get rid of that altogether. Like flatten all your dependencies, check that in if it came to that. I'm not suggesting you do that, but I don't see that NPM itself is an issue there.
Well, NPM is actually, if I understand, isn't it? It's sort of like a protocol that you could theoretically, and I know companies do, spin up their own NPM instances. So we don't necessarily have to think of NPM as the one global universal repository. It can be a way to get your own company intranet repository or something like that. So I think that's good, but I would also say Git and GitHub are pretty awesome for that too. So we don't have to discount those as the place that we keep repositories.
Okay. Go to the audience here. I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but do you have a comment on this? Oh, your name's on your badge. Well, Jonathan?
So we have the issue as well that a lot of these tools are now being stored in GitHub. GitHub's a company and we're relying a lot on GitHub. So what should be done? So Git's just distributed, so we could technically use lots of different
Don't use GitHub.
Yeah, use Git, not GitHub. Use NPM, the protocol, not NPM, the universal repo.
But what about the idea that, obviously you can spin up your own thing, but NPM it's a private company, right? And if you go to other languages where there's PyPy and there's gems, those are all actually community efforts with sponsored, as far as I understand, right? So does that change the landscape at all? No?
No.
All right, I threw it out there.
I'm sure it does change the landscape.
I would love to hear from Gareth about this. I mean, when you're working with government people, I would love to hear Gareth about that. When you work with government people, what do they say when the piece of software that you rely on is a 0.1 release and not a 10, 20, 50 release that can be trusted?
So the version number thing is nearly a red herring because it's an arbitrary string, basically. It's only representing value in the eye of the author, and so you can just go, well, if someone goes, oh, well, it's got to be 1. Like if you tell the author, they might just say, make it 1. But there is ultimately different organizations will have different sort of like risk appetites, and that's true of I work with the government. Yeah, there's going to be banks. There's probably going to be your new startup. The thing that kills your new startup is probably not a bad dependency from a third-party managed service, but it might be something that has an impact on a bank because someone tries to compromise that service and come back to you. It's a really hard problem, and it's not specific to JavaScript. It's specific to just third-party package services, which broadly, sort of having 1 per language was a stupid idea. It's too late to fix it. So the next new language that comes around will probably have an NPM or a Ruby Gems. It's a bit of a shame. The package management systems within operating systems sort of solve a lot of the problems, and people forget about the problems they're solving. CPAN for Perl does loads of really interesting stuff that no one's recreated in the last 10 years.
Guys, we're gonna.
One addition. I think one thing that will help us with at least the security concerns about using NPM is when NPM adopts something like Maven does with package signing and stuff like this. So we can assure our clients that this thing is really the thing that we said it's going to be there, and not something different because someone hijacked it or so.
Well, it solves the sort of man-in-the-middle issue, but it doesn't solve the fact that someone might have compromised the person who was uploading it in the first place.
But in general, isn't it? I find it always fascinating.
Guys, sorry, I'm getting thrashed to get to the new topic.
Okay,
it's cool. So we could go to the audience again, and I think this is a pretty exciting question. Oh, I guess I'm not going to the audience. I guess I'm supposed to ask Kyle Simpson to ask a question.
Like I said, they put me on the panel so that I could stir things up. So I get the pleasure of asking this question. There's a mini browser wars going on right now between Grunt and Gulp, and we toyed around with having you all have to stand up and declare where you are on that, but we won't. But there's several other would-be contenders, and that sort of betrays this idea that maybe there is one right build tool to rule them all. So the question is that a realistic idea that we're striving towards one great build tool that we need to find? Or is it just idealistic? And is it harmful fragmentation or useful experimentation?
I think that traditionally having multiple tools is a good thing because it drives innovation, and I don't think that that's a bad thing in this community. Build tooling on the front end is still very young, and it's somewhat in its infancy. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. One thing I would like to see is us sort of standardizing on perhaps a task specification. I know that there's been some effort from different build tools to standardize on the node task spec, which talks about things like having a single way to handle records or logging or notifications and so forth. I think that could actually help us avoid having to sort of have this sort of crazy wheel of re-implementing things all the time, but I know it has its own challenges.
I have an opinion on the Gulp and Grunt thing, which is I don't care. I don't use either of them, and I see these tools as useful for certain situations, but they are kind of glue that sticks together interesting things. I think the discussion and browser war type arguments going on, well, I'm not sure if anyone's really arguing, but arguments going on between these things really distract from why we're even doing a build process in the first place. Like, we're doing it to get faster websites, to get better development time and so on. If you use Grunt, if you use Make, if you use Ant, I don't care. It's like what we actually do in the build process, which is actually important. I would personally like to see less people re-implementing Grunt coffee, Gulp coffee, whatever, and just have coffee. Just use that and hook
so
into it any way you want.
So you feel like we should get closer to the grain and just actually call the existing tools rather than writing wrappers around this? It seems to be interesting.
The wrappers are fine, but just recognize that they are just wrappers. The important thing is what it's wrapping and what that actually does, and how you can plug these things together is just details.
There was a write-up some months ago about, it was kind of tongue-in-cheek, but it was tasks.js, which boiled down to simply just writing the JavaScript yourself. And while it was funny and sort of interesting from a boilerplate perspective, I think what it does miss a little bit, the reason I write tools and the reason I would make a Grunt plugin for my tool is not because that's the only way to use my tool. It's because I'm trying to lower the barrier to entry so that I get bigger market share. I'm trying to make it so there's as little boilerplate as possible to drop my template engine in. Of course, some people, and I might have the same perspective, but some people would say, well, it's okay to raise the barrier a little bit. If you want to use it, you have to know how to use it. Call the API, well document the API. So I think that's the reason why plugins exist. Everybody wants to make it so that their tool is the one that blows up and gets 10 million stars on GitHub.
Sebastian, you had a comment there.
I mean, the thing is, with all these dependencies, with all these plugins, when we say, okay, we have a common interface, so we only have one plugin that works with all of the build systems, perfect. I mean, in the end, it's a tool, and a tool should help us. So if I like hammer B better in my hand than hammer A, then I use hammer B because it's better for me. And the same is it with Grunt and Gulp and Broccoli and Fess or whatever. I mean, if you're a Node developer, Gulp.js feels more familiar with all the stream stuff, and so you can write it because it feels more familiar. And if you're a front-end developer, most of them like Grunt more because it's like this declarative approach where you only have to configure things. And I think it comes down to use the right tool for the job.
Okay, can I go to the audience here because there's like a bunch of hands going up. Just first over here, and then Remy.
Well, my question was actually
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so disclaimer, unfortunately, I'm one of these people who has also developed another build tool called Spammer. So I agree with everything we've said, and I think the idea of having interop between plugins is great. One thing to remember is that these tools are there to make it really easy for people. We want people who are scared by the command line to be able to do the right thing by default without having to worry about configuring crazy paths everywhere. So to me, what the real question is, what is the good baseline for these tasks that would work in different tools so that it does the right things? And just to throw a few examples is, should it be able to produce source maps correctly for everything by default? Should it be able to rebuild partially so you don't have to rebuild all your things every time? And all these things, I think, need to feed into what is the common sort of format for these build tools.
I think one of the really big challenges with coming up with a spec for build processes and that task spec is that it's difficult to create something that is flexible enough to also match the architectures of these different tools so that they can work behind the scenes and do what they need to do without necessarily feeling overly constrained. And unfortunately, so the node task spec idea that I talked about earlier, that's actually something that is currently on hold because none of the build tools could actually reach agreement on how they should approach this problem. It's really, really difficult. I'm hoping that later on in the year they'll come back to it and think that it's something worth value.
We talk about sort of like, oh, it's good to have multiple tools because that breeds innovation. Don't think you can't get locked into an open source tool, because you can. It's not just commercial stuff. Like we talk about lock-in. You get yourself locked in by something by saying like, you know what, the barrier to moving from this tool is so great, I'm not going to do it. At which point you benefit not one bit from the innovation coming from other tools.
Okay, can I get a quick comment from the audience here from Remy Sharp?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I don't personally use build tools at the moment. There's one step, but the thing is, jQuery was the tool that made working with JavaScript really stupid simple for a large amount of people, and suddenly they were able to write JavaScript without writing JavaScript. And these build tools have given me a way of just adding minification and getting that done, whereas before I wouldn't have done it, and many other people are going to be doing that. You're talking about getting locked in. I don't think it matters at this point. The build, getting hold of build tools at this point is so new for this community. If we get locked into Grunt for a few years and eventually there's standardization in 5 years' time, then that's a huge step forward compared to just not doing it at all and just delivering massive images over the wire, uncompressed images. We're still at that I think we're still at that very early days of when jQuery was kind of released for JavaScript.
I agree with that. I feel like this build tool conversation sometimes it skips over the fact that we don't talk enough about what's inside our build process. Like we should be caring more about like image optimization, image compression. I mean, that's the thing. Images are the thing that are like slowing down the web today. And we need to get more people caring about those problems and spend more time talking about like how we can actually speed up our pages and less time perhaps on, arguing why you should be using Gulp versus Grunt. I mean, there's still fantastic tools, but as I think Sebastian said earlier, people who are more familiar with Node are perhaps going to use Gulp, and people who aren't are just going to use Grunt, and that seems to be working.
I'm going to cut you guys off because actually the next question I think goes into just what Adi was touching on. I'm looking for from the audience. Peter Mueller?
I will have to read this as well because it's been changed a bit. Most build scripts, including those generated by scaffolding, are a chain of several discrete steps. Do we even need the complexity of having control of every one of these steps? Or should we instead have an opinionated build chain that just gets us to the endpoint that we're interested in?
Let's go with Nick.
Yeah, so like from my experience, like I've built an opinionated toolchain for our own build system that we needed, and I'm really happy with it. There's been a lot of work put into it, obviously, but I think in the end you actually get, like if you really want to get total performance out of your build process, not in terms of how fast it runs or anything like that, but in terms of what actually executes at the end of your build process, then I think that's definitely a very smart way to go. And you definitely don't need any particular tools like Grunt or Gulp to get you there.
Kyle had a comment at the start.
Yeah, I was, so I think going back to the Unix philosophy, which certainly informs a lot of what we're doing, it says have lots of tiny little tools that can be woven together. And I think that's the more appropriate way of doing this. When you get to the point where you've decided that there is a particular flow through those tools that makes sense for you, you write yourself a bash script so you don't have to repeat it again. And that's all you need. And in the JavaScript world, when you have a set of API calls through these different tools, you just write yourself a little node script that repeats that process over and over. So I don't think we need to worry so much about, oh, there's too many details here. You just wrap a script around it, and then you don't have to worry about those
I think the thing
details
is
if you don't want.
you said for me and I write, and I think actually sharing that unit for some people is really valuable. Some people in this room are going to go like, I'm a really good programmer, and that's exactly what they're going to do. And some people, and like Remy is saying, some people, like in this room or not, are going to go like, I have no idea what all these steps are doing.
So I just
but
make
I want the magic from people who are really smart to do it for me.
No, I just make a gist, and then I tweet it out. That's my solution.
So
to that
one
problem.
of the things that we tried to do with
distributing really usable software is hard. Packaging that up into a sort of something that is just easily usable off the shelf by someone who does not understand what's going on in the middle is hard work. But like it's valuable. And there's probably instead of these millions of plugins, there's probably 2 or 3 good ways that would be good enough for 80% of the people.
So one of the things we tried doing with Yeoman is actually trying to provide people with like opinionated workflows, especially when it comes to things like performance and what we think people should be doing. Because a lot of people don't know exactly what they should be getting in their build process to actually keep their pages fast and so forth, or what build tasks they should be using, whether using like Grunt or Gulp. And so there do exist solutions to help you with opinionated stacks for this stuff, but at the end of the day, if you find those too much and too overbearing, you can always just use them for reference, right? In the same way that people use HTML5 boilerplate. Just take what you want, delete, keep friendly the rest.
Just going to go back to Peter here.
Yeah, I'd like to touch on Carl's point about the Unix philosophy. I love the Unix philosophy, small tools, being able to chain them together. The thing is that Unix pipes work with text, and webs of files are not text. We would need to be able to pass objects like we can do in PowerShell.
Yeah, as well.
Because the thing is, some of the things that are really, really difficult to do with the existing build tools, revving files, concatenating files, all that stuff, are things that both Grunt and Gulp do really badly, actually, because they're based essentially on a continuation of the Unix philosophy or the makefile philosophy.
Like I touched on earlier, like steal things from things outside your community, and one of the things to steal from is PowerShell, because for those that that are familiar with sort of like that Unix philosophy of sort of chaining small things together, PowerShell adds basically a full object in between those things, and you can do a lot more with that.
But I don't think we need that. If you look at, not that it's bad, but I don't think we necessarily always need that. If you look at the flows for JavaScript tooling, parsers, analyzers, transpilers, code generators, and that whole flow and that round trip. If you look at that, they decided we start out with source code, and then we move to a tree format. And there's a relatively agreed upon tree format, the AST. We're actually working on a more complete version of that called a concrete syntax tree. That's the thing that moves from tool to tool. And then what you get out is more compiled code. So
I feel like
I don't think that's a big problem.
I feel like we've gotten a little off track. We've moved from, is there merit to having, let's say a plugin like Grunt Awesome that just does everything, and whether now we're getting into the details of chaining and stuff like that. So maybe just to bring us back, just a comment over here.
Because I think a lot of the things the Unix idea is to chain things through sort of in a functional way. You're taking output from one thing into the next thing. But some of the things we do, and there's one in Yeoman that the one that transforms. You can run things so it can take chunks of JavaScript and compile them into different files, and it keeps state, so it can do something at the start, go through the whole chain, and then refer back to something that happened. And that's the same for revving things. You have to have some idea of the state of the whole system to be able to rev things later on and go, right, this is what has appeared. So this whole idea of just having chains, even in Unix, you do stupid things where you write temp files and you get into all this sort of weird stuff when you're trying to do something that just isn't fundamentally functional. So it always goes back to I'll just do it the Unix way, but there are some things that just can't be done that way in very well.
Any comments on that?
Yeah, like that's kind of what I was saying. Like this build script that we use has a lot of those things that, like, at the start we find all the assets, and then we have a state that is then used later on. The downside of that is that it means that, like, you can't really share your tools very easily because it's very specific and bespoke to your application. And I know, like, one of the themes that's kind of coming here is like sharing and helping people get into the community. But there's the other side, which is I want to build the best app that I can for me. Which might sound a bit mean, but, like, that's my job. And I'm pretty sure everyone else here has got a job very similar to that as well. And that you shouldn't forget that sometimes you do have to just do something that you can't open source. That's fine.
Gonna stop there. That seems like a good closing point. Me. So gonna call the next question. Looking to hear from Ian Feather.
Okay, so this is on behalf of Andre Beres. Most of the pain in build process occurs at dev iteration. Would it make sense to implement things like Sass and CoffeeScript as plugins for developers, removing the need for repetitive build processes, or even in the browser itself? So I think he's kind of talking about having extensions which will allow you to iterate without having to run the build process in the development stage.
Just to jump ahead of this before you comments, this question interested me because what I seem to read a lot about new tools like Gulp produce is that the speed of building is actually becoming really important to people. So what if we can just not have that at all? Any comments?
I mean, I'm generally, I think we were all in agreement about, like, things like Sass and Coffee not necessarily belonging in the browser, right? We agreed on that earlier. But I think that in terms of your iteration workflow, so Gulp is commonly used by people because, like, when you're actually iterating on a project using Sass, it's a little bit faster. Whenever you make a change and you want to see that refresh in the browser, you don't necessarily have as much of a delay as you perhaps see with Grunt. It's not a massive difference, but it's important enough to people that they sometimes consider switching over. I think that we need to look at how we can actually keep our tools lean and fast where possible to improve on that.
It feels like it's a software thing.
Yeah,
it's like what you're saying is, well, I have a slow build script, and I bet those browser people have got some really good coders who can do exactly the same thing faster. And it's like, well, maybe, or you could find someone else who can re-engineer your build process to be faster. Yeah. Ultimately, you're doing the same job, you're just doing it in a different place with code. If Node isn't fast enough, write it in C.
So there's Sebastian.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing is we're web people, and we're used to hit F5 or Control R and refresh, and it changes. And not like the Java guys who could, like, grab a coffee while their thing is compiling. And I think we should really embrace that and not build, like, tools that are watching in the background of file system and then doing something for 10 seconds before we can see the change in the browser. That's not the web, and I think that's totally heading in the wrong direction. You have Sass and stuff, okay, but really don't overdo it. Just keep it clean and simple.
I think one point here is to consider, like, your total build separate to your development time. Things like watches can be good, or like running a local server that compiles these on the fly and can give you a good enough representation of the production build while you're developing. If your build script takes less than 5 minutes, that's fine. Above that, there's a problem, but less than that, I wouldn't care. As long as when you're developing, that feedback loop is very short, and do that through file watching, serving individual files on the fly. And then if you separate those two ideas, then I don't think you hit this problem.
One area that I think definitely, just real quick,
Yeah,
one
go
area
ahead.
that definitely needs to get better with those tools is the incremental recompile. So just because I change one SAS file doesn't mean I really actually want to recompile the entire damn directory, but that's often what happens. So if we could get smarter tools that it could understand, I only need to change this, recompile this one little part of this one little file, that would certainly speed up a lot of that
I
time.
want to get a comment here from Jake Archibald. It's right in the middle. People can't decide which mic he's going to get.
Aside from the performance issue, if the browser understands SAS or CoffeeScript, doesn't that make tooling better? We've got source maps at the moment, but that is just a basic mapping. Wouldn't we get a lot more if the browser actually understood the other language?
I think that we, when you say the browser understanding other languages, I think we need to realize that it's not just about like SAS and coffee. It's about SAS and less and stylus and other crazy thing that's been created while people are sitting in this room. But we have to define limits about how we can actually go about supporting these things and what we support. Because like if the browser were to support that, that goes back to one of the earlier questions about us having some sort of like a pre-process step where the browser could perhaps call out to external tools to actually get the job done. Because that's realistically the only way I can see it being done without you baking in support for SAS into the browser directly.
And it comes back down with the build process thing as well. It's still build process. It's just you've split it over like the browser and your code. That could be fine. And yeah, getting into the browser is probably easier than getting into a standard, but it's not as easy as like grabbing a plugin or writing some code yourself. So I think there's this barrier to entry there. Yeah, it's not quite the standards thing, but still like grabbing like the Chrome source code and adding that feature and getting it through a process whereby it's fit for everyone else to use. Much higher barrier to entry.
Someone earlier said, and I think it bears repeating, as soon as you put something into the browser, now it's going to move a whole lot slower in terms of change. So I don't think we ought to put SAS in there until we're really sure that it's pretty much done. And I don't think it is, so I think we need to keep it separate.
First comment over here from Chris.
A quick one when you said like ramping up people. I think the web started and became so big because it was easy to write something, put it in the browser and see it. And when I see a lot of people tweeting, like that people look up to, that tell people if you want to start with web development, go to the command line, get a Ruby gem, do this, do that, do that. Yeah. It's no wonder we're losing new developers to closed platforms instead of the web. Yeah. So could we do a better job in actually promoting power tools only to power users rather than saying start with this?
Mm-hmm. I think so. Sorry.
Actually, I've got one more question coming up that I think basically captures this. So I think we're just going to jump to that also because we're running low on time. Boy, if I can, should have queued this up ahead of time. Oh boy. Well, this is ugly. I swear it was here.
Let's start addressing this question while you look it up.
Yeah. Well, it's more like it's finding the person who speaks it.
Who's got that question?
Let's go to the audience. It's a question about, is tooling taking us away from these fundamental building blocks? You do? Yeah.
There we go. See? Crowdsourcing.
I think that the fastest iteration loop today is probably just sticking directly with HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. Only use these power tools when they're actually going to be genuinely useful to you, right? I think that's at the core of what you're saying. And I don't think that we should move away from that. If you're just hacking away on something, there's no reason not to stick with those tools. Where all this other stuff becomes important is when you're trying to develop for like a large system or something that's going to go out to production, and you want to make sure that if someone's accessing something on a slow network on a phone, that it's actually still fast, right?
So Eddie, just gonna.
Sorry, go ahead.
Also, can you say your name because I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah, my name is Florin, and the question obviously has been rewritten, but it covers my question exactly. As build processes become more and more complex, our source code gets further away from the fundamental building blocks of the web, JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. How does this affect future maintainability, and is this a good thing?
Yes, it's a good thing, because we all pick our various levels of abstraction. Some people loved writing in assembly, some people didn't, so we picked a higher level of abstraction. So all of these extra tools and things, when you decide, I say this all the time, source code's not for the computer, it's for the developer. Computer just cares about ones and zeros. So you choose ClojureScript because you like something about that tool and the way that allows you to express your code. And that makes you a better and faster and more efficient developer. So that's a good thing.
So to play just devil's advocate for a moment, but what about all the resources that we put behind HTML and CSS? We have, MDN doesn't have ComfyScript examples. And W3 Schools does not have SAS examples. Is that, we have like this huge base of knowledge, and are we, getting away from that? And is that necessarily bad?
I think back in the days we looked for developers for the web, and they must understand HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And today we're looking for TypeScript developers, SAS developers, and not.
Who's looking for TypeScript developers?
Yeah, I'd say certainly when we're hiring, we're not. We're looking for, when on the programming side, we look for programmers, and on the front end side, we're looking for people with a really good understanding of HTML, CSS, JavaScript. And the fact is, everything else they'll learn. So we write a lot of Ruby code, and we've hired actually relatively small number of people who were proficient in Ruby to start with, but they were programmers.
Then you're doing it. Then you're doing it right. But I've seen job descriptions with lists of tools, and it's like, in the end, you don't need to know all of them, but we just line them up because they're so popular, and we want to attract people to work for us. It's like, that's stupid. And
this is where you get job descriptions like 15 years AngularJS experience required.
Yeah.
I think
we're not going to fix that.
I think to go to what Christian was saying about how scary it is for a new developer, I don't think that should hold us back. I mean, you can still have those tutorials. They're definitely very worthwhile, but JavaScript is where it is now because we didn't let it hold us back. That we did start building upon it and create really amazing things with it. And the more that people do the amazing things, that's even better. So I don't think necessarily having a zero-level entry barrier is a goal.
Just want to get an update from Florian here.
I think you're not really addressing my question, because what I'm worried about is I'm writing code today, and it may be SAS, it may be ComfyScript, and in 5 years' time, I go back to that code and I can't run it anymore because it's not standardized. All I can run is my previously compiled code, and the output is.
I think that should be a serious consideration before you choose one of those tools.
So one of the challenges with choosing
different organizations as well are going to have a different threshold for that. Because if in 5 years' time your startup's either been sold, at which point you don't care, or it's gone bust and you don't care, actually probably doing optimizing for right now is massively important. Government stuff, I'm not going to choose something that's not standardized.
Addy, you had a comment?
I mean, I was just going to say that if you're choosing an abstraction, you're almost marrying yourself to it, and you can't expect you can't expect SAS to necessarily be the thing that people are going to use in 5 or 6 years time from now. You can't expect people to still be using CSS though, and probably JavaScript and probably HTML. So sometimes staying closer to the grain is not necessarily a bad idea. But to add to your point, a lot of the time these days people are just trying to build stuff that works now, and you need something that's maintainable for right now. And if that makes sense, sure, use these new tools to augment your experience and make it easier for you to develop. But I think that our abstractions are something that are, they're not going to be around forever.
Well, we're out of time, so I think that's a good place to end. Just want to thank all these amazing panelists for their thoughts and opinions. Thanks to you guys for being here.
So we have lunch now, so it's about 45 minutes, and then start coming back into the room. We restart at 2:15. Thanks very much. That's brilliant.